The Committee on Homeland Security will come to order. Without objection, the chair may declare the committee in recess at any point. Before we begin today's hearing, I would like to take a moment to recognize the loss of a friend to all of us on this committee, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Congresswoman Jackson Lee was a longtime member of this committee who always fought passionately for her constituents and causes that she believed would better the homeland. I would like to yield to the ranking member for his remarks that he'd like to make.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And like all of us, we are deeply saddened by the loss of my colleague who was my seatmate for quite a while, Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. Needless to say, she will be missed. So I'd like to, at this point, take a moment to honor the legacy of Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who, as I said, passed away last week. During her nearly 20 years on this committee, she served on every subcommittee and left her mark on all of them. As every single one of us in this room know, there was no more fierce an advocate than Congresswoman Jackson Lee, and she directed her passion to making the homeland safer and more secure. She was dedicated to oversight, asking pointed questions of government and private sector witnesses alike, and pressing for hard answers. She was a prolific legislator who took pride in writing her own legislation and improving the bills of her colleagues through amendments. Congresswoman Jackson Lee fought for resources for first responders, help for those suffering the effects of natural disasters, and immigration policies that reflect our values as a nation of immigrants. Congresswoman Jackson Lee's reputation across Capitol Hill was similarly impressive. Indeed, it often appeared she could be in more than one place at a time. Within 1 hour, the Congresswoman could be observed giving a floor speech, participating in a committee hearing on a topic she cared about, and then giving remarks at an event to support a cause. She was a reluctant and relentless public servant, and every cause she took on was better because of it. The nation owes her a debt of gratitude. I'm grateful that Congresswoman Jackson Lee decided to lend her immeasurable energy and tenacity to our committee. Her absence will be felt just as much as her presence, and we will miss her dearly. Today, we continue our prayers for her family, friends, and constituents. And I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, ranking member. I ask that all members of the committee please rise and join me in observing a moment of silence to honor Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee's memory. Thank you. The purpose of this hearing is to examine the assassination attempt against former President Donald Trump that took place July 13th. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. On July 13th, 2024, our nation came within an inch of an unmitigated tragedy and crisis. In Butler, Pennsylvania, a 20-year-old gunman mounted a building in plain view of former President Donald J. Trump's campaign rally, took aim, and fired multiple rounds. At exactly the right moment, however, President Trump turned his head to read a chart so that a bullet which would have pierced his skull instead grazed his ear. Three others sitting behind President Trump on the stage experienced a different fate. 50-year-old Corey Comparator, a father and former fire chief, was struck and killed. As one outlet recently reported, this brave and loving man, quote, spent his final moments diving down in front of his family, protecting them from the gunfire that rang out, end quote. He is survived by his wife and two daughters. Two others, 57-year-old David Dutch and 74-year-old James Copenhaver, were seriously injured. I'd like to pause for a moment of silence in remembrance of Corey and in prayer for the recovery of David and James. Thank you, everyone. This failed attempt on President Trump's life demands urgent and comprehensive congressional oversight. We must understand how it happened to ensure that changes are made so this never happens again. That was the scene last Saturday, where thousands of Americans were exercising their constitutional rights until they were viciously attacked. Yet what we saw after those shots rang out should also encourage everyone. We saw a leader under fire, rising up to show the attacker had failed. We saw brave Secret Service agents who put their bodies in harm's way. And we see Americans across this nation refuse to let this thwart their participation in our democratic process. At the same time, however, we also witnessed a massive security failure by the Secret Service and the Department of Homeland Security. The closest someone has been to taking the life of a president or presidential candidate since Ronald Reagan was shot in 1981, more than 40 years ago. We must be committed in our determination to ensure that this never happens again. That is why the House Committee on Homeland Security is demanding full transparency and accountability. That's why we made a trip to Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday to see the site for ourselves. I'm grateful to the ranking member and the 11 other members who were able to come yesterday. And I want to share with the American people some of what we saw yesterday. I, for one, was struck by how close the unsecured building from which Thomas Crooks took his shot was to the stage where President Trump was standing. What we saw yesterday only raises more questions about how this roof was unsecured. And after several of our committee members climbed on the roof, let me tell you, any excuse about the roof being too steep to post a counter sniper team up there is pure nonsense. Protecting the President of the United States and presidential nominees is the Secret Service's mission. There can be no room for mistakes. Unfortunately, that was not the case here. In order to prevent a repeat of this, we must first thoroughly gather and assess the facts. And that's why we're here today. Most importantly, to obtain answers for the American people from officials in the best position to provide those answers. And like tens of millions of Americans, our list of questions is extensive. Why was the rooftop which the shooter fired multiple rounds not secured? Who made the decision not to post a counter sniper personnel on the roof or in a place better to cover the roof? Were warnings from private citizens in attendance about a shooter on top of the building heard by federal law enforcement? And if so, why was nothing done to respond? How did the shooter access the rooftop despite reported federal and local law enforcement presence in and around the building? Were there communication breakdowns that prevented law enforcement officials from effectively communicating with each other in response to alerts and threats? The shooter was spotted and designated as a suspicious person prior to President Trump taking the stage. Why wasn't President Trump moved to a secure location until the Secret Service could investigate? The shooter visited the rally site multiple times before the actual rally. Reports indicate he even flew a drone on a reconnaissance trip to the rally site on the day of the attack. Why wasn't the site secure? Following the rally, the Secret Service said that reports President Trump's security detail requested additional security resources were false. However, then backtracked and told the Washington Post and that the Secret Service had learned new information, indicating the Secret Service headquarters may have in fact denied some requests. Why and when were those requests denied? These are just some of the most pressing questions we have and expected to hear answers from Secretary Mayorkas and Director Wray and Director Cheadle. We also expect to hear answers and questions about the shooter's motivation and what the FBI has found in its investigation, including information collected from the shooter's various devices. Unfortunately and unacceptably, they have refused to appear before the committee today. Director Cheadle testified yesterday before another committee, but many questions remain. Yesterday, she provided wholly unacceptable responses to members of the House Oversight Committee and completely failed to address the lack of confidence both sides of the aisle have in her leadership of the Secret Service. Her appearing before one committee yesterday also does not absolve her of her responsibility before this committee. In any case, make no mistake, we will continue to push for answers. While these federal officials refuse to testify today, we're grateful for the opportunity to speak with law enforcement members about the events of that tragic day. Their testimony will be critical to putting together this complicated puzzle, understanding coordination efforts, and getting to the truth about what happened. Before I conclude, however, I have to urge the ranking member to reconsider his legislation that was clearly intended to strip Secret Service protection from President Trump. While I understand the legislation would not have applied in this instance, we all introduced messaging bills. This one should be withdrawn. Today's hearing is critical so we can ensure that our children and grandchildren will grow up in a free nation where every American can participate in the democratic process. I hope every member will join me in getting to the bottom of what happened so that it doesn't happen again. I now recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Thompson, for his opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everyone. It's been 10 days since a 20-year-old took his father's AR-15 rifle to a campaign event in Butler, Pennsylvania, shot the former president and two others, and took the life of an innocent bystander who died protecting his family. We're grateful for the brave law enforcement officers who responded to the heinous attack, and our thoughts and prayers continue to be with the victims and their families. Let me be clear at the outset of today's hearing. The Secret Service has a no-fail mission, and there must be answers and accountability for what occurred. The security failures must be identified and addressed to ensure that they never, ever happen again. That work is already well underway. The Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Pennsylvania State Police have active and ongoing criminal investigations. The Secret Service has begun an internal investigation. Secretary of Homeland Security, Alejandro Mayorkas, has announced a bipartisan independent law enforcement review. And later this week, Congress will vote on a resolution to establish a task force on the attempted assassination. This committee also has begun its oversight as well. Yesterday, as the chairman indicated, I joined a bipartisan group of committee members on a visit to the Butler Farm Show grounds. We walked the site where the attack occurred. We saw the layout, buildings, and infrastructure for ourselves. We met with local officials and the county sheriff. Today's hearing is the next step in our oversight, and I hope it will be a productive one in keeping with the seriousness of the issue at hand. We must understand what happened in Butler and take corrective action to ensure the security of every Secret Service protectee. I hope to hear from our witnesses today about how state and local law enforcement work with the Secret Service and other federal agencies at these events and where coordination and communication must be improved. While we can have policy differences as Americans, we must be united in condemning political violence in all its forms. There simply is no place for it in our democracy. The attempted assassination is another tragic example of the threat high-powered weapons like the AR-15 pose to our communities and to police officers trying to keep us safe. These weapons have killed regular Americans from all walks of life: concert goers, church goers, movie goers, grocery shoppers, workers, and yes, even school children. I'm an avid hunter and law-abiding gun owner, but believe strongly that we must do more to keep these weapons off our streets and out of the wrong hands. As we continue our oversight of the events of July 13th, I hope the committee will work at the terrible toll that these weapons are taking and look at them and make some kind of policy decisions to keep them out of the hands of a lot of people who don't deserve them. They are military-style weapons. We use them to, our men and women, to defend people on the battlefield. Our neighborhoods and our communities are not battlefields. Mr. Chairman, I thank you for holding this hearing and the witnesses for being here today. With that, I yield back.
The gentleman yields. Other members of the committee are reminded that opening statements may be submitted for the record, and without objection, the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Kelly, is permitted to sit on the dais and ask questions to the witnesses. I will say that votes just got called, and so what we'll do is let our witnesses do each of their 5 minutes, then we'll go into recess and come back with questions following our vote series. Does that sound good to you, Ranking Member? I'm pleased to have an important panel of witnesses before us today. I ask that our witnesses please rise and raise their right hand. Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you will give before the Committee on Homeland Security of the United States of Representatives will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? You may be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses have answered in the affirmative. I would now like to formally introduce our witnesses. Colonel Christopher Paris serves as the Commissioner for the Pennsylvania State Police. In this role, he exercises command, administrative, and fiscal authority over the Pennsylvania State Police, the 10th largest police agency in the United States. Commissioner Paris has served in the Pennsylvania State Police since his enlistment in 1999. Thank you for the support getting to the site yesterday. Mr. Patrick Yos currently serves as the President, National Fraternal Order of Police. In this role, Mr. Yos leads the order and its more than 367,000 law enforcement members in representing police officers and the profession. Prior to taking his current role, Mr. Yos served an impressive 36 years as an active law enforcement officer. I thank the witnesses for being here today, and I now recognize Colonel Paris for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Chairman Green, Ranking Member Thompson, Homeland Security Committee members, good morning. I am Colonel Christopher Paris, Commissioner of the Pennsylvania State Police. I would like to take this opportunity to offer our condolences on the passing of Congresswoman Lee. I would also like to take this opportunity to express our condolences to the Comparator family and offer our continued prayers to Mr. Dutch, Mr. Copenhaver, as well as former President Trump as they continue to recover. I'm humbled to be here today and testify about a tragic incident which has deeply impacted the Butler community, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and our nation. I would like to dedicate my testimony here today to the approximately 6,400 women and men, civilian and enlisted, of the PSP who work tirelessly for Pennsylvania, and it is my honor to lead them. I'd like to offer a perspective that this is very much an ongoing, complex, and dynamic investigation. And each day, as we arrive at day 10 today, I learn multiple new facts as we uncover new information as the investigation progresses. I'd like to offer a point of clarification affirmatively about PSP's role. Prior to the shooting, our role was to support the Secret Service with personnel and assets that they requested. Our operation plan completed to fulfill this responsibility consisted of 32 members, and we had two main responsibilities: a motorcade operation for the transportation with the Secret Service of former President Trump, as well as manning and staffing security posts inside the secure area of the Butler County Farm Show. Additionally, we provided 2 marked cars with uniformed troopers outside of the secure perimeter to provide roving duties, as the name implies, responding to incidents that may occur as a large gathering of people were moving to the venue. After the shooting, very early after the shooting, I had a conversation with the FBI, wherein the FBI is the responsible investigating agency for the attempted assassination of a former president under federal law. The same actions that led to that also led to the homicide of 1 Pennsylvanian and the attempted homicide of 2 additional, as well as the use of force by the Secret Service counter sniper to neutralize the threat of Mr. Crooks, thus necessitating an officer-involved shooting investigation. So the PSP currently is conducting a criminal investigation parallel to and in concert with the FBI to identify any and all parties criminally culpable under Pennsylvania state law for the homicide and for the attempted homicides. And as I said, we are additionally conducting an investigation into the U.S. Secret Service counter sniper who neutralized the threat posed by Crooks after he opened fire. I've been recently briefed about the Department of Homeland Security's commissioned after action report. I can tell you that the Pennsylvania State Police will fully cooperate with that investigation, and it's my hope that I can answer some questions here today without sacrificing that ongoing investigation and prove to be of value to the committee. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Colonel Paris. I now recognize Mr. Yost for 5 minutes to summarize his opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Green, Representative Thompson, and distinguished members of the House Committee on Homeland Security. My name is Patrick Yost, and I'm the National President of the Fraternal Order Police, the nation's oldest and largest law enforcement labor organization. I'd like to first take this opportunity to recognize a long-term member of Congress and a member of this committee, Sheila Jackson Lee, for her contribution to great work done here in Washington. I want to thank you for providing me with an opportunity to appear before you today on behalf of the 377,000 members of the Fraternal Order of Police as this committee examines the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump just 10 days ago. Before I begin my testimony, I want to express my admiration for the Secret Service agents who jumped into action and protected the former president. Rarely does the public witness just how selfless these agents are, placing themselves between flying bullets and their protectee. They, along with state and local law enforcement officers on the scene that day, demonstrated extraordinary courage. I also want to extend my thoughts and prayers to the family of Corey Comparator and the others who were injured that day. My testimony today will not be specific to the attempted assassination of President Trump. Instead, I hope to provide a perspective of state and local law enforcement when providing support and assistance to these events. We must remember that the law enforcement mission is a shared mission, and agencies at every level routinely cooperate and collaborate with one another. Law enforcement in our country is highly decentralized, with more than 90% of services provided by state and local agencies through more than 18,000 different jurisdictions. State and local agencies would not be effective without the support of their federal colleagues, and our federal partners would be unable to perform their functions without the assistance of state and local agencies. Anyone suggesting that the United States Secret Service not rely on state and local agencies at these events is simply uninformed. At these events, local law enforcement works under the direction of the United States Secret Service, which must ensure that all agencies involved at the event have a clear understanding of their roles and responsibility. Law enforcement agencies provide valuable community insight that can be crucial in identifying potential risk and issues. They contribute resources, personnel, and support that augments the capabilities of the U.S. Secret Service to ensure that there's adequate staffing and all contingencies are covered. Local law enforcement should be part of the command post and communications center to facilitate real-time information sharing and rapid response to emerging situations. This collaborative planning process ensures that all potential risks are identified, mitigated, and that local officers are fully integrated into timely and coordinated responses. Our presence is a vital part of the security matrix, but the United States Secret Service ultimately is responsible and is the final arbiter of any security matters affecting their protectee and the public. Clear and constant communication between participating agencies and the United States Secret Service is crucial to ensure the security of the protectee and everyone at the event. All this said, there were critical failures of security at the event in Butler. It is important that we learn from these failures to better provide safety and security for our leaders moving forward, as in public also attending these events. In the coming election, we will have extraordinary challenges placed on our Secret Service as they provide security at sites all across this nation over the next 4.5 months. And I'm confident that state and local law enforcement agencies are well prepared and ready to assist the United States Secret Service in this mission. I want to pause for a moment, and I want to flag another issue that often creates unnecessary obstacles for agencies within working together in real time, and that being interoperable communications. In the aftermath of 9/11, Congress wisely established FirstNet to address the voice and data communication failures faced by officers, partners, and first responders. To facilitate full use of FirstNet's advanced capabilities, we strongly urge Congress to ensure that our nation's public safety organizations at all levels of government are aware of and fully leverage the critical communication lifeline. Further, Congress and the FCC must all take all necessary steps to guarantee FirstNet's continued success and evolution. In conclusion, close collaboration between Secret Service and their advanced teams and in local law enforcement agencies provide indispensable support that ensures the safety and security of our nation's leaders and the public. These collaborative efforts should exemplify the very best in our interagency cooperation and underscore our collective commitment to national security. I want to thank you for the opportunity to appear here today, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Yos. And Colonel Paris, I just want to make sure I say this. You feel comfortable at any time to say, I'm sorry, this could compromise the investigation. These guys get this all the time. This is classified information. They're accustomed to that. So just, they're gonna be cool with that, I assure you. Members will be recognized by order of seniority when we come back from votes, but we will take a recess and return 10 minutes after the last vote.
they might have. Mic check, 1, 2, 3.
Mass shootings have become so frequent that we don't even hear about them.
Here just within the next hour or so, Craig.
And Julia, there was, of course, also that issue. Reportedly, the Trump campaign had asked for additional staff leading up to that rally in Pennsylvania, but the requests were denied.
That's right. We know that there were repeated requests for other events from Trump's security detail, asking leadership in the Secret Service for more manpower and resources, things like magnetometers to scan people on their way into their rallies. We know that the former president is not like any other candidate. Usually the Secret Service does provide some security to presidential candidates, but of course with Trump and his position as a former president and the kind of rallies he likes to have with sharp rhetoric and outside venues, they said they needed more security. We know that those requests were denied. I'm told by Secret Service officials it's because of resources. They simply don't have the manpower to staff as they want. But Sheetal was clear that the July 13th rally did get all of the resources they requested.
Ryan Nobles also joins us now. Ryan is on Capitol Hill for us. And Ryan, for anyone who watched or listened to that hearing yesterday, this news of the resignation probably doesn't come as much of a surprise. The outgoing Secret Service director, she really caught it from both sides of the aisle.
She sure did, Craig. And, the performance that she had over 4 hours in that hearing room led to both the ranking member, Jamie Raskin, and the chair of the Oversight Committee, James Comer, sending her a bipartisan letter asking her to resign, which is unbelievably rare for the Oversight Committee in particular, which is often caught up in partisanship in a major way. And I've actually just gotten a statement in the last few seconds from the Oversight Committee Chairman James Comer, who was as surprised, I can tell you members of Congress were as surprised at Julia's reporting as anyone else. They learned it from us first. They said, and in this statement, Comer says that the Oversight Committee's hearing resulted in Director Cheadle's resignation, and there will be more accountability to come. The Secret Service has a no-fail mission, yet it failed. The historically on Director Cheadle's watch, at yesterday's Oversight Committee hearing, Director Cheadle instilled no confidence that she has the ability to ensure the Secret Service can meet its mission. And now we also know, Craig, that the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, and the House Minority Leader, Hakeem Jeffries, have agreed to form a bipartisan task force that'll be made up of 7 Republicans and 6 Democrats with a specific task of looking into what happened here and offer up fixes to prevent it from happening in the future. Craig?
Ryan Nobles there for us on Capitol Hill. Ryan, thank you. Julia Ainsley, thank you for your reporting as well. Again, the breaking news at this hour, Kimberly Cheadle, the Secret Service director, resigning in the wake of that assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump. That's going to conclude this NBC News special report. We'll have much more ahead on our streaming network, NBC News Now, online at NBCNews.com, and of course tonight on Nightly News. We will return most of you to the Today Show. I'm Craig Melvin. Thank you for watching.
More Americans turn to NBC News than any other news organization.
Closer to the Gaza border. A story of resilience and hope. Please take care of yourself and each other.
The paper towel will absorb the acid.
That's crazy.
Green tea to calm acne. This is my favorite tip of the day.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Oh, that's genius.
You just saved me $40.
Still to come in the Channel 2 News. Well, the waters are certainly receding now. Still too close to call.
Lester Holt reporting from the
Ground Zero, as it's being referred to.
It is, in fact, a taste of freedom. The Haitian people know a little something about resiliency. What's the biggest risk right now? Some of the troops who have been drowned. I want to welcome you to the first presidential debate. In fact, we've been told we can't go any farther. You with some resilient folks. Get in.
More Americans turn to NBC News than any other news organization.
What is going to happen now?
Back and forth, President.
This is it, right?
Welcome back. Some money news. All those cookies, the ones you eat, might just be staying on Google's web browser Chrome after all.
CNBC's Silvana now joins us now with more on that and other financial headlines. Good morning, Silvana.
Hey, Vicky. Hey, Joe. Good morning to you. Yeah, well, Google is scrapping a plan to remove cookies from its Chrome browser after years of promising to phase out those tiny packets of code designed to track users on the web. The reversal, it follows pushback from advertisers who are...
I'll take that as a no. Did y'all deny President Trump's request for more security? Yes or no? Request for additional security?
Request for security, all of those requests were fulfilled.
And were there any personnel redirected to Jill Biden's rally?
No.
Who made the decision on the direction of agents at either one of those rallies?
I'm unclear as to your question on the direction of the agents.
I said, who directed those agents to be at Miss Biden's rally or President Trump's rally? Those specific agents.
So there is a methodology in which agents are available for assignments, and they are assigned based on either geographic location or logistics or flight.
Ma'am, I appreciate all that, but that methodology about got President Trump killed. Was the security detail guarding President Trump a temporary detail?
The personnel who are assigned to the former president's detail are assigned to him.
Why was there a different detail on the opening night of the convention than the detail that was guarding him in Pennsylvania?
The president has a very large permanent protective detail assigned to him. They work shift work, and so it could be that people you saw at the rally were not working the same shift the day that he was.
I can assure you, ma'am, somebody that's a lot shorter than the president was not at the convention, and the people that were cowering down behind the mass of agents that were on top of the president were not in the convention hall. At least I didn't see them. You can't seem to answer a single question about an ongoing investigation, ma'am, and you don't know when the information will be released publicly. Are you waiting for the administration to sign off?
No, I am waiting for the results of the investigation, at which time.
Okay. Let me ask you one more question. You found explosives in the shooter's possession. Is that correct?
The FBI found explosives.
Do we know who directed this young man how to make those explosives?
I believe that the FBI is still looking into that on their investigation.
Ms. Cheadle, you said that the buck stops with me, and I agree. I don't think you should resign. I think you should have been fired. Ma'am, you are a DEI horror story. I've told my daughter multiple times, my wife and my daughter, we talk to her all the time about how she's going to succeed in life. She'll succeed in life by achieving. Ma'am, you have not achieved today. You've let the American public down. If it was up to me, you'd be gone. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes Mr. Crockett from Texas.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. And let me just pick up where my colleague from Tennessee left off. Director Cheadle, was the incident on July 13th due to DEI, or rather systemic failures in communication and potentially safety protocols?
The incident on the 13th has nothing to do with DEI. The incident on the 13th has to do with a failure or a gap, either in planning or communication.
Thank you so much. In fact, I have a few articles that I will enter into the record once I wrap up that actually acknowledge a number of women specifically for their valor in their service, whether it's been in various levels of law enforcement. But, you know, I want to...
Both the chairman of the committee and the ranking Democrat, Mr. Raskin, calling on you to resign, and not a bit of support from any Democrat or Republican on that committee. The clock was ticking.
Yeah, it certainly was. And Aaron Katersky joins us as well. Aaron, you have her letter of resignation there. How does she frame this?
In a note to the workforce, she said she did not want to be a distraction. All the calls for her resignation, she didn't want that to distract from the mission of the Secret Service going forward. She said she accepts full responsibility for what she called the security lapse in Butler, Pennsylvania. And she said it's with a heavy heart that she does offer her resignation. She couldn't survive. It was almost inevitable as soon as those bipartisan calls came during the hearing. And Phil, it's an end to a rather storied Secret Service career. She spent more than 20 years there. She protected Vice Presidents Cheney and Biden. It was then that now President Biden got to know her. She was installed as the director about 2 years ago to high praise from the president. But she made clear in the congressional hearing that she did not sign off on security plans, not that she would necessarily be expected to, but the members of Congress found just a lack of accountability. They also found that the lack of answers terribly frustrating.
Yeah, but it's good you point that out. She does have an almost 30-year career, and it is a storied career, but this is an agency where it's a no-fail mission, and you fail once and the buck stops here and she's at the top. All right, Aaron, thank you. I want to bring in Jay O'Brien from Capitol Hill. Jay, as Aaron says, and Pierre agrees with, this was sort of an inevitability. When, you know, the House Oversight Committee, when you have Dems and Republicans on the House Oversight Committee united in their anger against someone, not good.
Yeah, and that almost never happens, Phil.
Right.
And frankly, this was something that Republicans were considering doing for quite some time, grilling her here on Capitol Hill in the wake of that assassination attempt on former President Trump. Even when I was at the RNC this time last week, I was talking with top House Republicans there, and they were dismayed about the details that they were learning on phone calls and in briefings about exactly what happened there at Butler, Pennsylvania, and the timeline of all of this. You know, the shooter first noticed by law enforcement 60 plus minutes prior to that Secret Service sniper engaging him and things of that nature. Members of Congress, Republican and Democrat, frankly, but largely Republicans, were saying that that was unacceptable, that they wanted to extract a pound of flesh from the Secret Service secretary, as one member described to me here on Capitol Hill in hearings. And what you saw yesterday was that they had that public hearing and they asked her very pointed questions, and they were just not satisfied with what they heard from her. She didn't answer many of the questions. She said she couldn't because there was that ongoing investigation. So what she said on the Hill did not satisfy anyone, and even continued, and if not increased, those calls for her to resign.
And Pierre, I want to bring you back in because something you said really struck me, because I've been covering this for a week as well. And I actually did a story, I think Saturday, for Good Morning America, that was an actual timeline. We had a timeline because of her agency. We were able to piece these things together because of information that we got from her agency. She could have said
and other sources,
other sources, correct. At 5:41, this happened. At 6:06, this happened. I mean, it just seemed like, and tell me if I'm wrong, because you've covered so many of these and people who have been prepared to speak in front of Congress. Seems like someone may have even just given her bad advice about the prep, like just go in there and let them dress you down, let them get their sound bites, and you'll move on. But that doesn't seem like what happened.
Again, the decision not to give available information that she had at her fingertips was the fatal flaw, if you will, in the presentation. And Phil, we've all covered many hearings in our times in Washington. The fact that in this divided Washington, there was no carping between Democrats and Republicans at each other. None that I saw. Even though the Democrats were making points about gun control and assault rifles and these kind of things, the Republicans didn't attack them for doing that. And the points that the Republicans made from time to time, including using curse words, where Democrats, could have, pushed back strongly. There was not any partisan bickering. All the incoming was coming toward Kim Cheadle. And I think a number of things that probably sealed her fate. She noted that she had not been to the scene since the incident happened, had not been to the scene. And the fact that she could say that no one had been suspended or reprimanded thus far, 9 days out, was a telling blow.
Yeah, and a lot of the search for answers started with your one-on-one with her, Pierre. So thank you for that great reporting. I want to bring in Elizabeth Schulze now because Elizabeth, you're at the White House and have a statement now from President Biden about this, right?
Yeah, Phil, we did just get a statement from President Biden saying that he is grateful to Director Kim Cheadle for her decades of public service. He goes on to say how she worked for years, dedicated and risked her life to protect our nation, and that it takes honor, courage, and an integrity to take full responsibility for an organization that is tasked with one of those jobs. He goes on to say that this independent review that he ordered immediately after the assassination attempt on former President Trump will continue to move forward, and he will plan to appoint a new director soon. So this is the statement that we just have in from President Biden, Phil.
All right, Elizabeth, Jay, Pierre, Aaron, thank you all very much. We're going to have much more on this and our other stories just after the break. Stay with us.
Whenever news breaks,
we are here in Israel, a nation at war.
In Rolling Fork, this tornado tore through this town.
From Lewiston, Maine.
Was the biggest failure the agency has seen in decades. ABC News Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas joins me now, along with ABC's Elizabeth Schulze from the White House, former senior special agent at the Secret Service, Donald Mahalik, and ABC News senior investigative correspondent Aaron Katersky. ABC's Jay O'Brien joins me from Capitol Hill as well. Pierre, let's begin with you. How significant is this, and were you surprised?
Not surprised. This was inevitable. She was trying to hang on because her staff was telling me last night that she felt like leaving the Secret Service at this point when the agency was facing chaos would be the wrong thing to do, that she felt like that she could be part of the solution. But I think it was pretty much sinking in overnight after watching the press accounts, the analysis of what took place. That was the equivalent of a political, beatdown yesterday. I've never seen anything like it in my many years of covering hearings in Washington, where both Democrats and Republicans. From the moment she sat in that chair and raised her hand and was sworn in, they were on the attack. And it only became worse as she simply refused to answer some of the basic questions that we know she had answers to. Why she chose to do that is perplexing. But I also think the fact that it was exposed during the hearing that she had not yet gone to the scene of where the shooting took place within the 9-day period, the fact that no one has been suspended pending the ongoing investigation simply was unacceptable.
Elizabeth, President Biden is weighing in. He's released a statement on this. What does he have to say?
Yes, Phil, we just got this statement from President Biden. He's thanking Director Kim Cheadle for her decades of service and says that she selflessly dedicated and risked her life to protect the nation throughout her career there. He adds it takes courage, honor, and it was incredible integrity to take full responsibility for an organization that is tasked with what he calls one of the most challenging jobs in public service. And then he goes on to say that this independent review that he
advance, increasing the vice president's detail, dealing with the tail end of the campaign, and of course, trying to find closure to this investigation. So the last thing I think the director, being her dedication to the agency, would have wanted to be was something that took away from that focus. So I think at the end of the day, she made the right call, and she did the selfless thing for the benefit of the agency.
And Pierre, as we're working through this, since we've gotten her statement, you're actually getting some new reporting from the Department of Homeland Security. What do you have?
We have a statement from Homeland Security, Mayorkas, in which he talks about how he's, quote, grateful to Kim Cheadle for her leadership as the director of the Secret Service and her lifelong devotion to our country. These notes on her behalf lay out that, look, she's had a storied career. She's risen to the ranks, one of the few women to rise to that level within the Secret Service. But that doesn't change the fact that this was a failure. She acknowledged perhaps the worst failure since the assassination attempt on former President Reagan. In that case, you saw the Secret Service director resign within days. Members of Congress basically told her yesterday that they expected her to do so immediately. And I also think that going back to the interview that we had with her last week, on Monday, a week ago, in the interview, I pressed her on whether she would be transparent with the American people and with Congress. And she promised to do so. And I think what Congress laid bare yesterday is that they did not think that she was being transparent enough. And again, I'm not quite sure why the decision was made not to give more detail and simply characterize it. Look, it's a fluid situation. The investigation's ongoing, but this is what we know about this particular question that was central to the story. Why was that building not part of the interior security perimeter? And why was there not more personnel around the building and on top of the building, which had a clear line of sight to the former president? Those are the issues that ultimately became too much to overcome.
Yeah, I want to bring Aaron Katersky in here. And as Pierre points out, I mean, it's every American could see that setup with their own eyes. Everybody said, how could you not have someone on that roof? She couldn't answer that question or wouldn't answer that question. And the buck stopped with her. What did she say in her statement that she released?
She sent it to the workforce of the Secret Service, and she said that the incident in Butler, Pennsylvania does not define the agency, but she said the repeated and bipartisan calls for her resignation would have become a distraction. And she said she didn't want to be a distraction from the great work each and every one of you do towards our vital mission. There were questions about that mission that she could not seemingly answer. But she did reveal some facts that may have been troubling to some of the members of Congress. She said the Secret Service did not know that Thomas Matthew Crooks was on that roof with a gun until just seconds before the gunfire. Yet local authorities and even people with their own eyes, bystanders in the crowd, seemed to recognize that there was someone with a gun. And why did that message not get to the Secret Service command? Or if it did, why was the former president, not delayed in coming out on the stage, or other additional security steps taken? Those were some of the nagging questions that members of Congress could not get answered, to their great frustration.
Yeah, I kept thinking to myself that call is so important. We wear these earpieces in our ears, and so do the Secret Service, so that they could communicate with each other. And for about an hour, they knew. And this was the frustration that we heard yesterday from the bipartisan group of lawmakers. I want to bring Jay O'Brien in. Jay, the frustration was, that how could this go it was noticed, but how could it not get to Trump's team? They would have paused. Even former President Trump has said this, that on several occasions, whether it's weather or whatever, they say we got to pause for 5-10 minutes. You can't go out there. That could have happened. That didn't happen. That's why the lawmakers where you are on Capitol Hill were so angry. Have you had a chance to speak to anybody since her resignation?
Yeah, we did. We spoke with House Speaker Mike Johnson, who coincidentally was giving a press conference as this news broke. And so I asked the speaker, as he was walking out of this press conference, who was one of the principal voices calling for Kim Cheadle to resign, who made the case to her to resign in person yesterday when they met before her testimony before the House Oversight Committee. I asked him for his reaction. Here's what he said.
I know you mentioned it, Mr. Speaker, but what exactly did you say to her yesterday specifically?
We met in the library before she went out there. I made it clear, as I always do to everyone in these positions, this is not personal, ma'am, but your number one responsibility is performance, and you did not perform. In fact, it was an utter failure, and we almost lost a former president because of it. So accountability begins at the top, and you need to take responsibility. She nodded in agreement and went out and didn't answer the question.
And you heard him there remark on something that I've heard both Republicans and Democrats up here complain about, and Pierre noted it earlier, which is the fact that Director Cheadle was very restrained in her answers yesterday. She kept referencing how recent it was since the attack, how there was an investigation ongoing. And I was getting reaction real time from lawmakers who were in that room texting me saying they were not happy with the answers they were getting. And that lack of happiness clearly only energized those calls for her to resign, which of course resulted in her resignation today.
Yeah, and I've heard the demeanor was an issue for some of the Congress people as well. The only time you saw any kind of real, I mean, it wasn't even emotion, but anything other than a straight face was when I think Congressman Boebert asked her, did you personally apologize to the president? And she said, yes, I did. I want to bring Pierre back in because, Pierre, you have some new reporting, more reporting on the testimony that everybody saw that ultimately led to her resignation.
One of the things that the lawmakers bore in on yesterday was an answer she gave in response to the question I put to her, where I said, look, someone should have been on the building, top of the building, period. And she made an argument that the building had a sloped ceiling, sloped roof, and that was dangerous, and that played a role in the decision to keep personnel inside the building. That answer was scrutinized all last week, and she would have had to have known that that question was going to come up. Yesterday, she tried to give an answer to sort of walk away from that a bit, where she said there was overlay, there was overwatch, that was the reason why they didn't need to have someone on the building. And the response from members of Congress was, well, your overwatch didn't work. And then she was not in the position where she felt like she could give details about what was that capability that gave them the overwatch. And again, the notion that someone was seen, the suspect was seen on top of the building a full 20 minutes before the first shots were fired, and still somehow that information did not work its way to the people controlling Trump's movements, because all they would have needed to do was to just pause everything at that point and confront the person on the roof, and it's over, and a man would still be alive today. And that's, we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that not only did the former president get injured, a firefighter lost his life.
That's horrific. Pierre, thank you. I want to bring Don back in. Don, this isn't unique to our country. We've seen political violence. We've seen presidents shot. Pierre mentioned the assassination attempt of President Reagan. How did the reaction from the Secret Service differ from both of those, what we saw in the President Reagan assassination attempt and what we saw in Pennsylvania?
Well, the first thing is I just want to correct Pierre on one point. The director, who was the director of the Secret Service, Director Knight, at the Reagan assassination, was also the director during both assassination attempts on Ford. And he did not resign immediately. He stayed on till November of that year. And the Reagan assassination, afterwards, the Secret Service looked at its policies, its procedures, and it identified gaps. One of the main gaps was, at the time, the Secret Service did not position an agent with the press. The press were allowed pretty much unfettered access to the protectee. One of the other issues the Secret Service identified after Reagan was that the arrival and departure areas were not clean. Now they're clean. And the third thing is that they didn't have an agent at the hospital. So when they were trying to bring Reagan to the hospital didn't believe that the Secret Service was bringing the president to the hospital because he was shot. Which is the one thing to the benefit of the Secret Service. Anytime an incident happens, the Secret Service learns from it. They adapt their protective methodologies. They get better, and which is, I'm sure, is what's going to happen after this horrible incident with President Trump. They will go through the investigation, find out what happened, fix it, and address it. And some of the commentary about the roof and how the roof was covered and what the roof was covered. You know, the Secret Service works with partners. The Secret Service depends on its partners, and the Secret Service gives assignments at these events. And if somebody at the event is not doing their job or fails to perform or whatever, it impacts the entire security plan. So let's keep our focus on that as well. What happened there?
Don, Pierre, Aaron, Elizabeth, Jay, thank you all very much. Appreciate it. Vice President Harris is on her way to Wisconsin for her first campaign rally as the presumptive nominee. The rally comes as a senior administration official is telling our Martha Raddatz Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro and Arizona Senator Mark Kelly are the leading candidates for Kamala Harris's running mate. So let's bring back in ABC's Elizabeth Schulze at the White House, along with senior White House correspondent Selena Wang in Rehoboth, Delaware, and senior reporter Catherine Falders as well. Selena, let's start with you. President Biden is set to return to the White House, where he is expected to address the nation tomorrow night. What are you watching for
on, guys. I'm trying to figure out something. I might end up having to end this. Give me a sec. See if I can figure this out. If not, I'm going to have to end it and I'll have to pick it up later.
The committee will come to order. Members will be recognized in order of their seniority for their 5 minutes of questioning. An additional round of questioning may be called after all members have been recognized. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes of questioning. Colonel Paris, typically these events, do they typically have two control rooms or two sort of tactical operations areas where the Secret Service is in their sort of spot and the local law enforcement is in their sort of command center? Is that how it's typically done?
I would say from my experience and from state police operations, to include this event as planned in our operations plan, we had integrated communications by having our PSP personnel in the Secret Service command post.
So your person was in there in that command post on this event?
Yes, sir.
Do you know if the local sheriff had anybody or the deputies that were also provided, the local guys?
I would be remiss at this point to say I knew an exact listing of everyone in that command post.
The sheriff yesterday told us he did not. Would you expect him to have had somebody there?
So I would say generally, there's a lot of talk about interoperability and communications. The state police, for example, operate our own statewide radio network. So we have the ability to, if we have an incident, a long protracted incident, for example, where we need to patch other agencies in, we have the capability to do that. However, Secret Service, for example, maintains some additional encrypted communications. So the best way to integrate unified command
Is physically present in the
correct,
command
that would
site.
be our.
Yeah,
I
that's
would
how the
expect-
Army does it in the military.
I would expect our commanders to have personnel in there so that we could have radio communication as well as a redundancy in the operations plan with a telephonic backup.
Do you know if in this particular case, I mean, normally they sweep these sites with dogs. Was a K-9 team used here for this event?
I do not know. I have not seen the Secret Service operations plan. I've asked for it. I've yet to receive it. I did double check. That was something that PSP could typically offer to the Secret Service if they requested it. And I did verify that in this event, we did not provide any dogs.
Okay. As I understand it, there wasn't one, but you'd expect one in a situation like this.
So I want to be clear that when the Secret Service interfaces with the state police for whatever protectee and level of protection they're endeavoring to provide, the Secret Service is the lead agency. So as per the earlier statement of 18,000 law enforcement agencies across the United States, it would be very difficult, I would assert, for the Secret Service to operate all across the United States and have each individual agency telling the Secret Service how the operation should be run. They're the lead agency. If that was something that their protocols called for during the initial meeting when preliminary steps and agencies were brought together, that would be something that would be discussed typically.
The AGR building, did your guys on the ground there ever voice concerns to the Secret Service for not putting somebody on that building?
So I suppose the best sequence of events that I can give you is that PSP was notified by email on July 5th about this event. There was an initial planning meeting where we had commanders present on Monday, July 8th. So over Tuesday the 9th and Wednesday the 10th, those commanders that we designated, basically our orders are from the front office, my team on down. You know, we work collaboratively with the Secret Service, collaborate, give them what we can. The final walkthrough occurred on the 11th. Present at that meeting were the two commanders that were tasked with both staffing the security checkpoints on the interior of the secure perimeter, as well as the commander who was going to be in charge of the motorcade. But in addition to that, a PSP area commander was on that walkthrough, holding the rank of major.
Could you share a little bit of insight? I appreciate the timeline, but could you share a little bit, because I only have about a minute.
I apologize.
Yeah, the specific to the AGR building.
So on that walkthrough, our area commander asked specifically who was responsible for the AGR building, and we were told that Butler ESU was responsible for that area by several Secret Service agents on that walkthrough.
Okay. All right. Last quick question. Real quick, I mean, I'll let you comment about it. The slope of the roof, would that have prevented a sniper from being up there?
I don't believe so, sir.
Okay, thank you. I yield. I now recognize the ranking member for his 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Parrish, you talked about your tenure with the Pennsylvania State Police. Have you worked other events where a presidential candidate or the president has come to Pennsylvania?
Yes, I have, sir.
So this would not have been an unusual occurrence to participate?
I ran the numbers. We typically do about 20 missions a year, the low 20s a year in a regular year. We're already in the low 20s this year, being an election year. So our commanders in the field who interface with the Secret Service to plan and provide support are on a routine basis. I wouldn't say an everyday occurrence, but a fairly routine basis.
Okay. So can you walk us through the Pennsylvania State Police's interaction with the Secret Service? You kind of started off giving us from the point of contact that an occurrence was about to happen. Was there anything particular about the Butler, Pennsylvania event that stands out as regular, irregular, or anything?
I would say, not to my knowledge, based on our discussions with our commanders who planned it, it progressed along a normal timeline. They attempted to give the Secret Service, and I believe provided the Secret Service with everything they were requested.
So your role on that day in terms of the state police was what?
So I would classify it as in a support role, and the two main, those participating in the motorcade to get former President Trump from his point of landing to the venue in Butler County and back, with several other additional entities that were requested by the Secret Service. And then on site, we had to staff security posts that were determined by the Secret Service. All of those posts were inside of the secure perimeter of the Butler County Farm show.
I guess I was one of those individuals who traveled to Butler. Just for my information, have you had any interaction with the FBI or anything as they look into the investigation as to what you or your men observed on that day?
Yes, we're conducting an investigation largely in concert with and parallel to the Bureau because the actions of crooks have federal legal implications and state law implications.
Okay, thank you. President Yost, in your comments, you talked about the need for communication. You talked about FirstNet. And so we have federal, state, and local law enforcement at an event like what we're talking about in Butler. But in our conversation with some of the locals, not state police, but the sheriff's department and the chief of police in Butler yesterday, those individuals did not have communication with actually state police or Secret Service. Would that, in your professional opinion, be a vulnerability for managing an event like this?
Well, I think we can go back to 9/11 when we identified at that time that the interoperability of different agencies to be able to communicate really was a hindrance. There's an infrastructure in place now to address these interoperabilities, but at the same time, they're not always utilized in every event. I do not have any direct knowledge whether that was the issue here, but I can tell you it is a common issue in law enforcement and ability for our agencies not to be able to communicate. Not that the technology is not necessarily there, it's because that they're not always incorporated.
Yeah, you know, we passed legislation mandating obviously FirstNet interoperability, and we tied funding to make sure that that happens. But here we are looking at this situation, and we picked up some valuable information that we're still not where we need to be on that. I would think that Colonel, the role of the state police is invaluable, but it appeared in talking with some of the local officials, as you say, it's just, you're not primary, you're kind of secondary in that role, that we need to somehow, as a committee, look at how do we enhance the overall mission so that we have no gaps. So I look forward to the work of this committee, identifying the gaps, look at the after action review to close those gaps. So just to tell you one, Butler, Pennsylvania has no permitting process for events of that size. So you can announce it and hold it, and local government doesn't really have anything to do with it. And we were assured by local government that they would try to fix that. That they said we have to be more involved in events of this size, so that if this was not the best venue, then that permitting could have gotten engaged and suggested an alternate venue, those kind of things. So thank you very much. I yield back.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize Chairman McCall for 5 minutes questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank you for the site visit that we had at Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. It was very eye-opening, educational. I agree with the ranking member's comments in terms of, after 9/11, after 9/11, connecting the dots and federal, state, and local working together was the answer. I led a joint terrorism task force when I worked at the Department of Justice, and I also was involved in national security events, so I kind of know how these things operate. My question is to Colonel Paris. It's standard practice that the lead federal agency will come in and meet with the state and locals regarding the security plan before the event, prior to the event. Sir, did you participate or did your department participate in that?
So I did not participate. As I stated earlier, There were two commanders dedicated to those two primary roles, the motorcade and the staffing of the posts on site within the secure perimeter, as well as a state police area commander. So just as a way of background, our area commander that covers multiple troops in that area of the state, out of nearly 5,000 troopers, there are only 4 area commanders. So that major was present for the walkthrough on the 11th.
And were your troopers assigned inside the perimeter or outside?
Inside.
Inside. And
With
was
the
the
exception-
outside within the jurisdiction of the local police?
So just as a point of clarification, there were 2, on the operations plan, there were 2 marked cars that were assigned roving duties, which would primarily, as the name implies, be outside of the secure perimeter on roadways, responding to incidents that potentially could occur as a result of a congregation of that many people. But
So we saw, we walked into, we actually walked onto the roof where the sniper was. A clear, eyes on, clear shot of the president. A tree blocked the Secret Service's view. This kid did some investigation. He had a drone out there days prior, got an aerial surveillance of the premises. And that position was probably the best position outside the perimeter, as far as I could tell. There was also a water tower. That would have been a perfect spot for Secret Service. Were you aware of any presence of Secret Service in this water tower?
I was not.
And you're aware of what I'm talking about?
I am familiar. I physically flew out there on Saturday the 13th. It was still very much an active crime scene, so I did not walk the roofs, but I did.
On the adjacent building, we got a tour of that as well, where I believe the local police were positioned. There were 3 windows. The first one had a plain view of where the sniper would be. However, they were stationed in the second and third windows. Are you familiar with this at all?
I am not, from the standpoint that I have not seen the Secret Service's operations plan, and our deference would be to them to assign Butler ESU.
Right.
According
And
to.
they were apparently local counter snipers. Do you know if they should have been assigned to the rooftop?
I would defer to there are many ways that you can cover. Obviously, positioning people on the rooftop would be one of those.
No, and going to the actual site, way too close. He should never have been allowed to get on top of that building. And I don't know how, and I know he was on your radar inside the perimeter. You seem to have lost him, and somehow he finds his way up to the rooftop unimpeded until a local law enforcement officer crawls on top of the roof and looks at him, and he points his AR-15 at him. My question to you is, what was the communication like that day? Typically, Secret Service has one channel for them, the other channel for state and locals. Was there any communication to identify, hey, this is not a local police officer. This is, in fact, an unidentified individual on the rooftop. Was that communicated to the Secret Service?
So my belief, as I sit here today, is that we did have integrated communications from members that were inside of the Secret Service command post. Completely deferential to the ongoing nature of the investigation. I have an understanding of a sequence of events, but I would like to draw a distinction between a sequence of events, meaning.
So my theory is that they thought maybe he was an officer, but then they find out he's not. The thing I find interesting is that the counter sniper Secret Service, within seconds of the shots on the president, kills the suspect. That tells me he had him in his sights. Maybe he was not aware of who the individual was not identified. But I know within seconds after the shots were fired at the president, the threat was eliminated. Lastly, I just want to end with this. This was actually astonishing, and I want to get your confirmation. He had a detonation device with him, and 2 of his bombs were located in his car that was parked on the other side of the perimeter. Seems to me a good theory would be that he was going to kill the president and then detonate his car, causing a diversion, and then escape from the crime scene. Are you aware of any of this?
I am aware of the presence of the device on his person. We were aware of that very early on, and that was a serious tactical consideration in the hours in the immediate aftermath as we worked that crime scene. But to your point about his ultimate theory or what his ultimate motivation was, that remains under investigation.
And he had a rangefinder on him as well. That's a big red flag. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Violence has never been the answer. And I thank both of you for your service in law enforcement and testifying today. Violence has never been the answer. Not on a certain day in January and not on a day in July. I remember I was 12 years old and my dad, I was on the way to school on a cold day in January. And my dad, who was a cop, stopped me as I was about to leave and he wanted me to watch the television. His guy had just lost a presidential election and some young kid from Arkansas was about to be sworn in as the new president of the United States. My dad was burned. He really liked George Bush. He did not like Bill Clinton. But he told me to stop and watch the television coverage of the inauguration because he said, look at that, son. He said, that's what makes us so special. My guy lost, this guy's getting sworn in, and not a shot has been fired. That's what makes us different. Violence has never been the answer. It's despicable that somebody thought they could take a shot at the former president and change the course of history. We don't know much about the political beliefs of this individual. We know he was a 20-year-old male, registered Republican, gun enthusiast, also had researched the DNC, also had researched President Biden, also had researched Leader Hakeem Jeffries. We don't know what led this madman to try and kill the former president, but it's despicable. And the people who went to that rally deserved to hear, without violence, the candidate that they were supporting. Commissioner Paris, I'm sorry this happened to your community. I'm sorry this happened to the person who died and the persons who've been wounded. I just want to understand, though, because we are a country that is armed to the teeth, how many firearms were within the perimeter, just by back of the envelope estimate?
The only firearms of which I'm aware that were inside of the perimeter were those in the possession of law enforcement.
And would you estimate that was hundreds or dozens?
I would only feel comfortable not having seen the Secret Service operations plan about the PSP members that were inside of the perimeter.
Okay. How many rounds did the shooter fire before he was killed? Do you know?
I believe that the number is eight casings have been recovered.
Okay. I also understand the emotions around this assassination attempt, but I am not going to allow some, and I say some, the chairman of this committee is a serious legislator who wants answers. Some are not. And some are trying to rewrite what has happened in our country over the last 8 years, erase what happened in this building on January 6th. One member of this body in Congress said the Republican district attorney in Butler County should immediately file charges against Joseph Biden for inciting assassination. Another said Congressman Scalise, Justice Kavanaugh, and now President Trump, for years, Democrats and their allies have recklessly stoked fears, calling President Trump and others threats to democracies. Another said Democrats and liberals in the media have called Trump a fascist. They've compared him to Hitler. They've tried to lock him up. A radical shift in what has really happened in our country. In fact, the former president's current vice presidential nominee is the one who said that Donald Trump might be America's Hitler, might be a cynical a-hole, cultural heroin he's responsible for, nauseous and reprehensible. I joined the chairman in seeking unity as the antidote to political violence. unity as the antidote to political violence. But we're not going to erase and rewrite and allow some to reincarnate themselves as victims of what happened. We can't let this ever happen again. We must arm law enforcement and have better security perimeters. But in this country, violence has never been the answer. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I'll now recognize the Vice Chairman of the committee, Mr. Guest, for his 5 minutes. Mr. Guest, for his 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for both being here today. You both classified as what happened on July 13th as critical failures. I would expand that and say it was a colossal failure. And I think you have both stated that the ultimate responsibility for what occurred that day falls upon the Secret Service. Colonel Paris, I know that your officers were there in a support role. You were following the operational plan set out by Secret Service. You testified that the primary responsibilities for your officers were motorcade and then the interior perimeter, and that you had 2 roving officers there, really just out there to provide support if necessary and called upon. You mentioned earlier that you went to the scene on the 13th, and thank you for going there and being a part of that. And you also testified earlier that you have not been provided the operational plan by the Secret Service. Is that correct?
That's correct. We haven't received it yet.
When did you request that?
I'd have to go back and check in the earlier part of the investigation. That was just something that we asked for as a matter of course. We were not told no. We just, to date, have yet to receive it.
And that would be important, would it not? If you're going to investigate what happened on that day, the operational plan, that is the starting point for all the events that later transpired. Is that correct?
Well, I don't want to overstate the role of the state police here is to investigate the 3 Pennsylvanians that were shot and the use of force by the Secret Service counter sniper. To the extent that we need to know the sequence of events leading up to that, we obviously would like to know as much as we can, but it's not our role to do an after-action report on the sequence.
Well, but all the shootings occurred simultaneously. The same shot that struck President Trump, one of those shots killed one of your fellow citizens, and 2 others were injured. And so you can't separate the 2. This is one investigation into a shooting that occurred in which one of your citizens were killed, 2 more were fatally injured, in which the president himself was struck. And so the fact that the Secret Service is stonewalling your investigation, that they're not providing you this information. We saw the testimony yesterday from the Secret Service director where she refused to answer questions and has now resigned. I find that to be especially troubling. We have the Secret Service not wanting to cooperate with Congress, not wanting to cooperate with a fellow law enforcement agency. And I personally find that troubling. As we look, and as you are aware from speaking to your officers that were there physically on the scene that day, did Secret Service, did they have any drones in the air so that they could have an eye in the sky and see what was happening to your knowledge?
To my knowledge, I'm not aware that they were using drones, but that
And
I haven't seen the operations.
does your agency have drones?
We do maintain some drones.
So if Secret Service would have requested your agency to fly drones that day, you would have been able to do so. Is that correct?
We would have endeavored to try to honor that request. Yes, sir.
And you testified that you've been to the scene of the shooting. Did you see the water tower that's located approximately 100 yards from the building where the shooter fired those shots?
I did see it, sir.
And would it have been possible to have put an officer, and again, that's not your responsibility to do that, that's the Secret Service's, but would it been possible to put an officer there looking down on the scene of the rally and the building where the shooter occurred? Would that have been something that would have been possible to do?
Presuming that there's a way to access the water tower. I didn't walk over. I was probably several hundred yards away, so I can't say that I could.
And if you had an officer up there, that would have provided you a strategic viewpoint of the events that were transpiring below, correct?
I would agree. Tactics, height gives a tactical advantage. Yes, sir.
And then I want to ask you also about the roof where the shooter was located. You said you didn't go on the roof, but you viewed the roof. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
The Secret Service director, prior to her resignation, said that she did not put anybody on the roof because it had a sloped roof that would have created a safety concern. I was in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday with many members of this committee. My fellow member, Carlos Jimenez, who is 70 years old, and I guess he doesn't mind me saying that since he has put that information out there. There's video of him easily traversing the roof, walking across the roof, and even though he is some 50 years older than the shooter. And so my question is, do you agree with the assessment of the former Secret Service director that the roof was so sloped that it created safety concerns?
I can't agree with that statement, sir.
All right. Thank you very much. I'm out of time and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Correa for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you and the ranking member for putting together the trip to Butler yesterday. Good, eye-opening trip. And Colonel Paris, thank you for hosting us out there. I certainly hope that the Secret Service does cooperate with us in our investigation as to what went wrong. Secret Service has to be 100% correct all the time. There's small force, 2,300 plus maybe 1,300. So you local police officers are the force multiplier. And to hear you say that miscommunication was an element here is unacceptable. We talked earlier to the fact that FirstNet was put together post 9/11. It's a little bit over 20 years ago. And to hear that we still don't have the technology for people on the ground to talk with each other is of concern. It's even of greater concern to me when I was taking a tour of that farm in Butler, Pennsylvania yesterday. I had local law enforcement officers, local electeds coming to me, whispering to me, there's more here to the story. We need to talk about what actually happened. To have people that were on the ground there, concerned, afraid of stepping forward is unacceptable. To tell us of other failures that maybe this committee does not know about yet, that were part of what happened in Butler, Pennsylvania, is unacceptable. I asked one of the officers, safety officers, could you talk to the Secret Service? Said, no, we can't communicate. Took us 15 minutes to communicate with them. Local elected official who said, I have other stories that I need to talk to you about when you have a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, we're 4.5 months away from this election. Pennsylvania is a battleground state. You will have these kinds of events again. And to know that we don't have the facts, let alone execute a plan to fix the holes, is unacceptable to our democracy and to our country. We can talk about the facts. The facts are a lot of things went wrong. Let's talk about how to fix it. Fix it now. I think we start with accepting the fact that things went wrong and that we need more resources. Colonel Paris, your volunteers, your officers that you put on the line to help the Secret Service, are they actually compensated somewhere for their overtime, their extra time they're out there?
They're in a paid status, yes. They're not, we assign them to those duties, and if they incur overtime as a result of the contract, the contractual bargaining agreement, we pay them.
So let me ask you something in the minute and a half I have left. One of the local officers there, after we spoke a while, I said, well, let me summarize what you just told me. You're asking me who's in charge. And he asked me, yeah, I want to know who's in charge. I said, well, let's talk some more. And he said, Lou, we don't know if it's the campaign or the Secret Service that's in charge here. Said, if I called for a row of dump trucks to be put up behind the stand, it wouldn't happen because the optics would not be good for a campaign rally. I want to know who is in charge protecting our national candidates. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to see if we can ask those tough questions. This is not a Democrat or Republican issue. This is about trying to come up with some rules, protocol to make sure this does not happen again. After the events, we can sit here, we can point fingers at each other and talk about partisanship. It's not going to fix our democracy, our electoral system. Mr. Chairman, I do hope we go back and talk to a lot of those folks who are not here today, who wanted to talk, who weren't invited, and a lot of people, even if we invite them, are not going to talk. Because frankly speaking, they want to keep their heads down as the shooting continues. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Bishop for 5 minutes of.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Paris, are you aware whether any law enforcement officer or officers was or were posted in the second floor window of the AGR building?
I am aware, yes, sir.
And what is the answer?
To my knowledge, there were 2 posted there from Butler ESU.
And you said Butler ESU. What is the acronym ESU stand for?
Emergency Services Unit. It's a team that's comprised of multiple agencies that pool resources on a county or several county basis in order to enhance capabilities and training and be able to respond. Basically, a mutual aid agreement is my understanding of it.
Is it sort of like a SWAT team?
They are trained in SWAT tactics, to my knowledge.
So there, how many ESU officers were posted to that second floor window?
So I am aware that 2 were in the building, but again, I have not seen the Secret Service operations plan.
Do you know, well, you say in the building, were they in a window, where a window out onto the scene?
From briefings that I have been given, I was told they were in a window, yes, sir.
Did they remain on post?
I was told that at a certain point, they began searching along with other local officers in the immediacy after Crooks had been identified as suspicious by them.
By them?
My understanding is that they identified Crooks for not matriculating. He never, to my knowledge, Crooks never made it through the secure perimeter into the venue space itself. That he was identified by those members as suspicious in part because of that. And then at some point, he produced the rangefinder, which heightened that suspicion.
So Representative Crane took a video on site yesterday. I'd like staff to put that up. It's just very short. There's a few seconds. They can do that. If I understand correctly, this is from the second story window of the AGR building. You can see that window comes out from the sash and swings out to the right. There's an aerial photo right after Crooks was killed, where Crooks's body's on the roof, and that window was open. Was it from this vantage point that those ESU officers spotted Crooks?
I don't know that particular window, but my understanding is from a second story window is where he was initially spotted.
Okay, so are you then saying that, to your knowledge, those ESU officers left the location where they could look out the window to go in search of this person?
That is my understanding.
So sometime before between the time he was spotted on the ground and identified as someone suspicious until the shooting, they had left that post to go look for him. Is that what you're saying?
My understanding is yes, along with other municipal officers that responded to that area. And that's based on interviews that we've conducted. And I want to be very clear that I don't want to establish a timeline minute by minute because we don't have that yet.
I think that's revelatory. I haven't heard that information. I did hear before that and there's a local news station. Well, there's a local news station report from July 17 that says that local law enforcement were told they couldn't be responsible for securing the AGR building during the Trump rally. And of course, you've testified a moment ago or earlier in this hearing that it was your understanding that the meeting with the Secret Service on the site was that ESU was going to handle the AGR building. Which is it? Do you know?
My understanding is what my initial answer was.
Okay. You also, in response to Mr. McCall, you started to say something. You were saying that you did have integrated comms, and you were saying you were deferring to the ongoing investigation, but you have an understanding of the sequence, and then he cut you off and went on to another question. Do you know what you were about to say? Do you remember that?
Just that we had members of PSP inside of the Secret Service command post, and we were maintaining communication with our people.
Had ESU maintained position in that window overlooking the roof, isn't it true that they would have had a clean shot at at Mr. Crooks as he was ascending the roof to his shooting position?
I'm not prepared to say that because I don't know the exact timeline of events.
But it's your understanding, though, that they were no longer in that room where they had been previously overlooking the building at the time he was ascending the roof. Is that correct?
Could you repeat that question?
The ESU officers were no longer in that room where they could look out the window and oversee the roof as that video shows.
I believe they were actively searching along with additional municipal officers for Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time's expired.
Gentlemen yields, I now recognize Mr. Carter.
Thank you,
for
Mr.
5
Chairman.
minutes.
And thank you to our witnesses for joining us today as we convene to discuss the attempted assassination of former President Donald Trump and its profound implications on our nation's political landscape. It is imperative that we recognize the growing threats to our homeland. The failure of the Secret Service to protect former President Donald Trump must be thoroughly investigated and addressed to ensure such an incident never happens again. Violence has no place in political discourse, regardless of our philosophical differences, our parties, or our beliefs. We must stand united against such actions and uphold the principles of democracy and respect. What happened on that day was an incredible breach, a threat to our nation because one of our leaders were placed in harm's way. Secret Service has a principal role, and that is to provide protection for our party leaders, whether they're Republican, Democrat, or other. Rather, they are someone that we agree with or someone we disagree with. It's not a luxury. It's a necessity. It's an imperative. And while we all have lots of questions, it appears abundantly clear that the two of you, and while we appreciate you being here, own no responsibility to the breach. And I respect the fact that the questions that are coming to you are very difficult for you to answer because you have limited facts. But I do appreciate your presence. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate what you do. And for all the men and women in uniform, we thank you for putting your lives on the line to protect us. I will ask this general question. If you were in charge, can you say what you might have done differently?
I would defer to the Secret Service from the standpoint that our expertise in the Pennsylvania State Police is not primarily focused on full-time dignitary protection, sir. I would endeavor generally to try and put whatever resources and partnerships in place to maintain and ensure the safest event we possibly could.
Do you believe that the coordination failed between agencies?
Again, I can only comment on the state police portion at this point. We continue to learn more 10 days in, and I have not seen the Secret Service operations plans.
Mr. Yost, can you join us and share any light in your expertise on
Yes,
where we are and how can we make sure this absolutely never happens again, regardless of who might be at the podium? President is a president is a president.
I could not agree with you more. In this situation, if I'm speaking on behalf of local law enforcement or state law enforcement, I would say that, again, the primary responsibility of making these calls, making these decisions, and making the operations plans going to be the Secret Service. As I mentioned earlier, there are some 19,000 agencies across this country. It would be impossible to have any continuity or any consistency with what we do in protecting, our leaders. So Secret Service would have to play a huge role in this part. If you're asking me personally what I would have done different, well, obviously I look at an assessment of the situation and look at all of the elevated positions that were in place. They should have been part of a contained area. But that's just my own personal view of not seeing news reports and not physically being on site.
I have never served in any form of law enforcement, but I think I would have figured that that perimeter should have been tighter. I think I could have figured out that there's no way that that building where the shooter sat, laid, and aimed should not have had snipers on top of it as well, negating any opportunity for a shooter to be there. Notwithstanding that there should have been a sweep of the area, we should have had our people on that building as a point of view for our former president. And as I said, a president, a president, a president, a former president, a former president, former president, a cabinet secretary, a leader. We deserve to have answers to these questions, because when we don't have answers, those who would rather divide and create theater by saying things that aren't true and they know aren't true, distorting facts and trying to suggest that somehow people played an active role. Listen, the American people deserve the truth. And so I am imploring that we have somebody at these tables that can answer the questions, the good, the tough, the uncomfortable, the comfortable, because the American people deserve to know. This is something that should have never happened. And we as a committee, in a most bipartisan fashion, should stand together to make sure that we send a message always, that we will always protect our leaders, whether we agree with them or not. Mr. Chairman, I yield.
The gentleman yields. I now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Jimenez, for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Paris, you said the United States Secret Service, Penn State Police was there, Butler ESU was there. Any other law enforcement agency there?
According to the operations plan that PSP put together, there were elements from Butler County Sheriff. Deputy sheriffs were on some of those interior posts, and thus they were on our.
I just need the answer.
I apologize. There are the one additional ones that I could name would be Butler County Sheriffs were in our operations plan. Pittsburgh City Police provided assets to the motorcade, and I believe Allegheny County Police also.
You said that you were in the incident command center, that your agency was in the incident command center with the Secret Service.
Yes, sir.
Well, all the other agencies in that command center?
I believe that some of those agencies were represented, but I can't definitively tell you.
We need to find the answer to that. It was Butler ESU in that command center?
I was told at one point that there was a representative in there. How long and over what period, I'm not sure. I'm aware of three.
So the agency that's in charge of the outside perimeter, actually the agency in charge of the greatest threat, because when you stand at the podium, and I stood there, and when you look, all you had to do is look around. There's the greatest threat right there. It's 100 yards away. It's elevated, direct line of fire to the president. I stood on that roof. No problem standing on that roof. And yes, I am 70 years old. Okay. So the timeline is very important here. If in fact they thought that Mr. Brooks was so suspicious that they actually pulled the ESU counter snipers away, because there were counter snipers, what I understand, in that window, a way to look for him. And from what I understand the timeline, it's about 20 minutes before the president came out. Was that information relayed to the Secret Service, that they were looking for a suspicious individual and that people had been pulled away to look for that suspicious individual? Was that relayed to the Secret Service?
I believe that it was.
And was that relayed to the Secret Service, the team that surrounds the president himself?
I can't answer that.
Well, if it wasn't, that's another big mess up. And I can tell you, this is just one of a bunch of mess ups that I've seen. One of them, question that I have is, why in the world was that team from ESU in the building to begin with? Why weren't they on a rooftop? And it was a hot day, right? And so that's another question that I'm going to, why were you assigned inside a building when you have a little window, it's like this big, right? And your line of sight out of that window, unless you stick your head out of the window, is pretty limited, your view. So why were you inside, not outside? Who said for them to be inside and not outside? What did the Secret Service tell you were inside the perimeter, right?
Yes.
For the most part,
You're saying
you were
yes.
inside the perimeter.
Me personally, or the?
No, I'm saying your agency was inside
Yes.
the perimeter. But actually the biggest threat was outside the perimeter. And so who developed the plan to protect the outside of the perimeter? There's only one agency. That's the United States Secret Service. Because you really can't ask the local agency to do that because they're not in the business of dignitary protection. They don't do it all the time. You don't do it all the time. They do it all the time. So, Mr. Chairman, we're going to need those other agencies to come in. We need a timeline. Who said what to who, and what the action that was taken. You know, one thing that I noticed in another video, and I've got to find out if it's true, and it appears to be true, is that the snipers on the south side reposition to look to the north side. And I want to know what the timeline for that was. How far in advance were the snipers, the counter snipers on the south side told, hey, you need to look at a threat on the north side? And how much time was there between that and then the shots being fired? Do you have any information on that?
I do not have a specific timeline.
Okay, and those are that's the information that we need. It's not unusual to have people on different frequencies. Actually, you have to because you have so many people, but you have to have everybody in the same place so they communicate with each other. So we need to know if everybody that was in charge or had responsibility for protecting not only the interior perimeter, but outside the perimeter, if they were all in that incident command center. And if they weren't, that's a huge problem too. Thank you, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Magaziner for 5 minutes from Rhode Island.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And first, I just want to join my colleagues from both sides of the aisle earlier who recognize the tremendous legacy of our colleague, Sheila Jackson Lee, who, I feel very fortunate to have had even just a year and a half to work with on this committee. She always came prepared. She was diligent. She brought empathy and was a great example to us newer members. So I'm very grateful for her legacy, and I know it will live on for a long time to come. And I also join my colleagues on both sides in condemning the assassination attempt on former President Trump and condemn all acts of violence. Violence is not the answer. Our condolences go out to the family of Corey Comparator and all who were injured and traumatized by what occurred that day. And, I think about the children who were at that event and had to witness that. And that is something they will carry with them for the rest of their lives. We don't know the motivation of the shooter at this time, but I remain concerned by the rising tide of political violence and domestic violent extremism in this country, which impacts all of us. This is something that some of us have been talking about a lot in this committee. In 2023, the U.S. Capitol Police investigated more than 8,000 cases of direct threats against members of Congress, a tenfold increase from 2015. And so I ask everyone, take down the rhetoric, remove violent rhetoric from our political discourse. Remember, as President Lincoln said, that we are not enemies but friends, and we have to appeal to the better angels of our nature. And yes, we have to make sure that this never happens again. It is welcome news that the director of the Secret Service has resigned, but if we say that that is enough, then we're not doing our jobs. We need to understand what protocols, policies, resources need to be changed, if any, to make sure this does not happen again. Colonel, I wanted to ask, I imagine the Pennsylvania State Police deals with lots of events like this, right? You have lots of political events, big events, Secret Service protectees who come in and out of Pennsylvania. So can you just help us understand, is it unusual to have such a small perimeter around an outdoor event like this one?
I would say that we routinely, as a matter of course, exercise deference to the Secret Service to set the perimeter for an event like this based on the protectee.
Yeah, I think it's important to note that Pennsylvania is a state where anyone 18 and above can carry a firearm like an AR-15 without a license. It's an open carry state. And so my second question is, outside of that perimeter, were there any controls in place or any, legal tools that you had at your disposal, if an individual with a firearm had been spotted, again, within 300, 400 yards of the former president?
I would defer to the Secret Service. I haven't seen their operations plan, sir.
Right, but you as state police and then also the Butler local police who were responsible for areas outside of the perimeter, if this individual had been spotted earlier with a firearm, because it is an open carry state, what legal tools would you have had at your disposal?
So we would have responded and attempted to make contact and ascertain what the person was doing there and what their activity was.
Yeah. So a number of us have asked questions about lines of communication, and I think that's important, right? Because to the layperson at home, what we're trying to understand is if this individual was spotted on the roof, as he appears to have been well over a minute before the shooting, did the local officers who spotted him know how to radio into the command center? Was that information relayed? And then was it in turn relayed to the Secret Service? This question has been asked a few different times, but can you tell the public what you know about whether local officers outside the perimeter knew how to radio in a suspected threat, whether there was an individual in the command center who was receiving those calls and communicating them to the Secret Service?
So I do know that Butler County set up a command post on the site itself, along with the Secret Service's command post, but they were not located in the same building. The exact communication between municipal officers and that command post or the county dispatch that they would rely on. The state police have our own statewide dispatching. We can communicate with the dispatching centers telephonically and through electronic means, but we maintain separate dispatching systems. So I would defer to
So the locals were not included in the Secret Service command center. The state police was or was not?
the PSP. I can assure you the PSP was in there.
Yeah.
Additional people, I was briefed on one occasion that there was a representative from Butler ESU that was in there. When they were in there, and the length is not really a focus at this point of our investigation into the homicide and the attempted 2 homicides, as well as the officer-involved shooting. So that sequence of events has come up pursuant to us investigating that, but I am very remiss to give you a minute-by-minute timeline and what the communications were.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields. I now recognize Mr. Pfluger for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My deepest sympathies to the family of Sheila Jackson Lee. We worked very closely together on many things, and she was an excellent member of this committee. I agree with my colleague, Mr. Carter, when he talked about Americans deserve the truth. I absolutely agree with that. And also Mr. Magaziner talking about Republicans and Democrats working together on the oversight. Imagine if we worked together, the transparency that we could have on so many other issues that are going on right now. And I believe that that is possible for us to do. Thank you both for being here. Colonel Paris, was it clear to you, when we talk about rules of engagement, deconfliction plans, the assignments of which law enforcement agency will cover which section, did you have concerns prior to the president coming on stage? And if so, did you voice those concerns to the Secret Service?
So just to be clear, I was not present at the venue on July 13th.
But in the planning and the lead up,
Planning, my default position would be that our commanders are aware of what their responsibilities are within a unified command structure reporting to the Secret Service.
And do you believe that it was absolutely clear that there were 0 questions of who was supposed to cover what areas of the venue?
I can only comment to our responsibilities, and I believe our responsibilities were delineated to us, and I believe we met or exceeded those responsibilities based on everything that I know as I sit here 10 days in.
I think there's still a lot of questions regarding the plan,
Agreed.
And this is always in any sort of protection assignment. That's always the hardest thing. Who are friendly assets? Who could be a vulnerable hostile actor? Who displays hostile intent, hostile act? I think it's clear there was a failure, and we definitely want to get to the bottom of it. President Yost, do you get the impression that Secret Service at any point in the run-up to this or other events has been stretched thin when it comes to just the work hours that they are putting in, the resources that they have. Was that communicated in any way?
Well, I can't speak directly to that. I can tell you that law enforcement across this country is stretched thin, just simply due to the inability to be able to attract the best and the brightest at any levels in order to maintain the staffing levels we need. So if that is the case, and we're not meeting those levels in Secret Service because of our inability to be able to recruit, then we need to address that. Or if it's the alignment of assets and the assignment of individuals, then that in itself is something as well. And it's something I'm not in a position to be able to speak about, other than to recognize that there's two huge factors here that need to be addressed.
Well, it's clear that that's the case. And God bless both of you for what you do, for the hours that you put in to protect our communities. And we can't do it without you, and we need you, and we will continue to advocate for you. I want to talk about now, that leads me into this next question. There's a piece of legislation, HR 8081, called the Disgraced Act. It says denying infinite security and government resources allocated towards convicted and extremely dishonorable former protectees act, which is a whole mouthful of basically taking details away from people that could include those who are convicted. Talk to me about the impact if former President Trump didn't have a protective detail of U.S. Secret Service there. Talk to me about the impact on state and local partners to protect them in any of the communities that you represent. And by the way, he also was responsible for taking out al-Baghdadi, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, and Qasem Soleimani, and the Iranian government wants to do harm to him and other people like him. So what's the impact if you don't have Secret Service help?
More than happy to yield. So I think, we're trying not to become very political in this. I think we have a president of the United States who has, by simple virtue of his position, having served as president, that deserves a certain protection because of his service to the country. So the rest of these things are all things that are not for me to decide, other than to tell you that I think we have a responsibility to our leaders.
This is not political. That's not political. He deserves protection. You're absolutely right. Colonel Paris?
I would just echo that my understanding is it's a federal statute that creates the Secret Service and tasks them with those responsibilities. So to contemplate a different paradigm, I would reflect back to the legislature to contemplate
If
something.
he was denied a protective detail in Pennsylvania this past week, the weekend prior, what would that have done to your local resources to protect him adequately?
I think the removal of any resource inherently makes the burden on the surrounding resources that would have been committed somewhat additional.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields. Point of order.
Point of order.
Gentleman's recognized.
So I appreciate the gentleman's question, but let me put it another way to the witnesses. The reference legislation.
Mr. Ranking Member, I mean, a question to the witness would be someone yielding
Yeah.
to you. A point of order, I'm allowing you to make a point of
Thank
order.
you. Well, the point of order is, if you read the bill, it says that if you are a convicted felon and found and sentenced by a judge,
Mr. Chairman.
then you would not be, that's my point of order, that you would not have service. You have to be a convicted felon and sentenced. Now, at the time the bill was filed, nobody who was a protectee was a convicted felon. But if those who are lawyers here know that once you are a convicted felon and sentenced, you are remanded the custody of that particular law enforcement agency for custody. I think it's an anomaly to try to say that the Secret Service would have to protect a felon in jail, a convicted felon. So this whole notion about my legislation, I just say to the gentleman, if you read it, it says you have to be a convicted felon and sentenced. Now, we're not there. The conjecture, you can do whatever you want. But let me be clear about the bill. Republicans have made a lot of hay about the bill, saying it's about former President Trump and would take away his security. That just is not true. The bill doesn't mention former Trump, President Trump, and it would not have affected security at this tragic event. The bill talks about any Secret Service protectee who is convicted of a felony and sentenced to serve jail time. And it does not take away security. The bill makes clear that when a protectee is sentenced and remanded to the custody of prison officials, the Secret Service is able to hand off the prisoner in an orderly fashion, and that Secret Service agents aren't forced to become correctional officers too. That's the legislation. That's all it says. For the record, we can go back to.
The gentleman will need to get to his point of order. And
Well, point of
so we can
order
move on.
is, the line of question is inconsistent with the legislation. And it does not say on that day, former President Trump would have been without Secret Service protection. He is not sentenced. If he's not sentenced, he will still have the protection. Plain and simple.
So you yield on your point of order there, Mr. Ranking Member? You did, okay. I want to make a point of order then as well. And, you know, a lot of times we hear from both sides of the aisle about rhetoric and how rhetoric and the things we do in messaging bills that we do shapes discussion, impacts people. And first, my point of order is prison isn't necessarily a safer place. You can ask Mr. Epstein's family about that. And so to suggest that somehow you'd have the security necessary in a prison, I think is just not an accurate statement. In terms of, you know, I agree with the ranking member that his bill did say that it would not apply in this particular case. But, you know, it's more about what we're doing and what we're saying at certain times that generates the attitude in our society. And so I just make that point of order about this particular legislation. I made in my opening remarks a request that he withdraw the bill. But,
Mr. You just have a second. I just want to just make a quick comment. I think the chairman was clear that this bill was filed well in advance. So to connect, you mentioned timing. It's important to mention timing that it wasn't.
well, we don't want to debate the bill. We're here to hear from witnesses that are here. So I'm going to go ahead and end this now, and we're going to move on. And I think actually, Mr. Ivey is up for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to associate myself with the remarks of our members here with respect to the loss of Ms. Jackson Lee. It's with deep sadness that I feel her loss. I share not only this committee with her, but on the Judiciary Committee as well. And she was insightful and inspirational in the way she handled herself and her role here in Congress. I also want to join with the comments about sympathies to the comparator family and the individuals who were injured on the day of the shooting. And I want to thank the chair for taking us up to Butler yesterday. My only regret about it was that it was too quick. And I think that, and I didn't know it was going to be like that, frankly, until after we got there and had a chance to talk to people in the community. But when we got there, they were very anxious to talk to us. In particular, I had conversations with Angela Flieger, supervisor for, and I hope I don't butcher this too bad, Connequenessing Township, who was extremely helpful, and Sam Zerzolo, who is a commissioner from Butler Township. And they were able to provide information on several fronts that I think we need to pay attention to, not just for this particular event, but going forward. Could you hit a video for me there? I think Ms. Flieger tried to produce this and sent it to me. The red building is the one that was directly behind the stage. The building in the center there was where the shooter was. The reason I'm asking for this to be shown is that as you get past the middle of it, look to the opposite side of the field from where the shots came. Oh, you can stop it now. I counted about 12 rooftops there, just sort of standing at the front. I'm a former federal prosecutor. I don't have a background in protection, but my thought was, why would we pick a spot where you had that many rooftops that were available? And my colleague, Mr. Crane, definitely defer to your experience as a sniper in the military, and your point about picking the water tower as a higher point would have been a good one, I think, to consider. And I'm curious about finding out what the Secret Service would say about that. But I just thought that this was a bad site to pick, no matter where you put them. There was just too many openings. The field was totally open. And one of the things that Ms. Flieger pointed out was that the road that went to the side of this spot here, the stage was right in front of those two buildings. The snipers were on top of those, I believe. They didn't shut down that road. And she also showed me a photo of her husband going in on that day through a fence that wasn't guarded in the perimeter area. Another point that she made was that the night before the speech was done, she and 50 or 60 other people from the community came to decorate the stage and, put up the red, white, and blue blending and the Trump signs and everything. But the point she had there was that none of those people were vetted before they went into the area and were up at the stage and, could have done anything, I think was the point that she made. And also noted that apparently the shooter had hidden the gun somewhere on the site by, I think, where I hate to call the name of the business, but the business where the shooter ended up taking the shots from. So I think there's a variety of concerns here that I look forward to getting a chance to hear from these individuals. I don't know if it's going to be in the context of this committee or the oversight committee or the task force that's been proposed. Whoever does it needs to go talk to these folks, because the ones that I talked with had not been interviewed by the FBI, Secret Service, or local police. And they have key information that I think we should have, especially in making decisions about going forward. And then just a couple quick points before my time runs out. I think it came up with respect to the communications piece. I appreciate Mr. Yoi's comments there, but we need to figure out not just what happened on that day, but when we do these at other sites across the country going forward, what's going to happen with the communications? And if they're not using the national bandwidth that was set up, how can we make sure that that happens in the future? And then with respect to the local police not reinventing the wheel every time, one of them suggested, maybe some kind of clearinghouse or information where local police departments, local elected officials, who, for example, in this instance, didn't find out the president was coming until a few days before, and therefore had to scramble to catch up. I believe she called your office, Congressman Kelly, to figure out what was going on, and you hadn't even been told about it yet. So we need to get to a point where we've got better communication, that we're giving elected officials and law enforcement at the local and state level more lead time and more information so they can prepare for these events. And I know that the director has resigned, but I think it's critical to make sure that we go forward with the investigation of the Secret Service, whether she's there or not. And then the last point, I apologize for running over, is that to the Secret Service and to Homeland Security, I know there's going to be a process now to replace her, but that cannot get in the way of us sorting out what happened on that day, and more importantly, what we need to take forward, because we've got other events coming up in the very near future. We got to make sure we take those lessons quickly, and so we can move them forward. And I thank the chair for his deference for giving me a little time to run over there, and I thank you again for
I think
taking
you're-
us up to Butler.
You were making an excellent point, and I didn't want to stop you, Mr. Ivy. I now recognize Mr. Garbarino, the gentleman from New York, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Colonel Paris, there have been conflicting reports about the location of state and local law enforcement. Secret Service Director, I believe, said that, former Secret Service Director said that local police were in the same building that the gunman fired from, while other accounts indicate that local law enforcement was in an adjacent building. Were any Pennsylvania state troopers, state police assigned to the building where the shooting happened?
There were no state troopers, to my knowledge, assigned there, sir.
Do you know if any other local law enforcement were assigned to inside that building?
I only know that Butler ESU were assigned. When you say that building, I'm referring to there's a series of buildings there that have covered walkways or second-story walkways that allow you to almost like a pole barn type configuration, a modular type building. But to my knowledge, there were no troopers assigned to that location, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Yos, as technology has evolved, drones have become widely available to both law enforcement and the general public. For a large event with this level of security, would you normally expect law enforcement to use drones for surveillance and deploy counter-drone technology?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the last part.
Would you normally expect law enforcement to use drones for surveillance and deploy counter-drone technology?
Well, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, I just, in my experience at this location is there are a number of elevated locations that should have been secured. There are a lot of ways to secure that. They could be with individuals assigned to it, but certainly an overwatch to be able to get a good visual of those locations is paramount.
So it's been reported that the Secret Service apparently did not use drones for surveillance, but the shooter was able to fly his own drone over the area earlier on the day of the rally and get aerial footage of the site. Do you know if that's true?
I have no direct knowledge.
Were you, okay, so, and you know if whether or not local, state, Secret Service enforcement was aware of any drone use?
I've heard the news reports, but I have no direct knowledge.
Would you consider this a major security breach?
Absolutely.
Now, it's also been reported, Colonel Paris, that the local law enforcement spotted the shooter outside the AGR building and on its roof minutes prior to the shooting. Did local police alert the Secret Service that the gunman was on or around the AGR building roof? Do you know?
So this goes to my earlier qualifier about the timeline, but my understanding of the sequence of events is that he was determined to be suspicious as a result of behavior that he was exhibiting, milling around that area in front of the AGR building. There was a text thread that was going, I've been briefed, between the ESU members. They identified, they took a photo of him. At some point when he utilized the rangefinder, the suspicion was heightened. So I know at a certain point in the command post, a member of PSP received a phone call and a text message from members of ESU. And I know from an interview that that was immediately relayed in the command post to the Secret Service.
And what happened? Yeah. That was my next question. So what happened? What actions were taken after it was relayed to Secret
So
Service?
when the PSP member received that information and verbally turned right around, gave it to the Secret Service, our member was provided with a number to which the picture that had been taken by the Butler ESU members, or that was on that group thread, to which that should be sent. Our member did that, and our understanding was that was some element of the Secret Service.
So this was all reported. Yeah, this was all reported to Secret Service, and they gave him, Secret Service then sent him back, one of your officers, a number back to send the information back to. Is that what you just said?
That's my understanding.
When did that happen?
Again, the actual timeline, I'm very remiss because I know these timelines need to be hammered out exactly to the minute, but I would say, that the overall timeline is about an hour before is when he became suspicious to ESU. What I want to say is, if we know that former President Trump was shot at 11 hours, it was probably in the vicinity of 25 to 30 minutes, but I want to make sure that's a very...
So it was before he went on to speak.
But at that point, just to be clear, he was determined to be suspicious. There was no information that he possessed a weapon. He was outside of that building where the ESU was posted. They were being vigilant. It's, I think, relevant that there were other people at the venue who were suspicious and reported likewise in a close temporal nexus to that as well.
But just to confirm, the Secret Service had this information that there was a suspicious individual. He had used a rangefinder, which made him even more suspicious. And this was all reported to them prior to the President Trump being allowed on the stage to speak?
I believe, again, I'll defer to when the president came out. I know that that was probably 20 to 25 minutes before 11 hours. And steps were taken by the municipal officers over in that area to they were actively looking for crooks. You saw the building yesterday. That's a pretty wide footprint. They began looking for him. There were scores of people making their way across that facility. Again, just for some context, there were over 100 people that day that necessitated or in requiring medical attention due to the heat. There was a missing 6-year-old. This individual was deemed to be suspicious because he was walking around and not moving into the venue. The rangefinder obviously heightened that, and they were attempting to locate him as people were moving across that space who were attending the event to the secure perimeter.
Was he the only one
The-
determined to be suspicious
the-
that day?
The gentleman needs to wrap it up,
Oh, he
and
was
perhaps
he was
somebody
there.
else will yield to you or me
I yield back.
on this topic. I recognize Mr. Goldman now for 5 minutes.
Or we'll just pick up the questioning here.
That sounds great, prosecutor.
First, I do want to mention how sad it is to see Sheila Jackson Lee's empty seat there. What an incredible inspiration to so many of us, and a member and advocate, community presence, and we really are sorry to miss her. She would be very eager to be asking questions here today, because there are a lot of unanswered questions, and I sat through a 4.5-hour hearing yesterday with the director of the Secret Service, and we got no information. So I'm going to jump on, piggyback off of Mr. Garbarino. Where you left off is that you relayed, or PSP relayed, the photograph to the number that the Secret Service directed your officer to. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Now, did anything come back? Any instructions, directions come back from the Secret Service?
So again, that is left to the after action. We're trying to come up with a sequence of events that led to Crooks on top of the building where he ultimately took the shots. So
Right, but you said,
I
I'm trying to find, just, I don't need the specific timeline. I'm trying to just figure out the sequence, because you said that many of your officers, or Butler ESU officers, were looking for Crooks. That was after that photograph was relayed to the Secret Service?
My understanding was after the photo was relayed to the our trooper in the command post, and yes, Crooks was in that area around the building. My understanding is 2 additional municipal officers who were on a different post responded to that area, and they began actively looking for Crooks. They circumvented, or they circumscribed the building to try and locate him. It became apparent at some point that he was up on the roof. Those 2 municipal officers who responded then, to their credit, actively, once they realized that he was on the roof, one boosted the other one up, hanging from the ledge of the roof. By the time that officer was boosted up on top of the roof, Crooks was on it, almost in that final position that you saw. He had the AR out, and he pointed it at the municipal officer who, suspended from the roof, was not in a position, feet dangling at that point, to draw a weapon or continue hoisting himself back up on the roof. He drops back down from the roof, and at this point, I believe that's when the video that's been widely circulated with people filming Crooks up on the roof, saying there's somebody up on the roof. There were other law enforcement around the building running, but their vantage point on the ground did not lend a clear line of sight to where Crooks was at the top of that building. One of our troopers on roving patrol also was notified. That word went out, and he responded about the time that the municipal officer was boosting the other officer up onto the roof.
What was he notified of?
I don't know specifically. That's going to be part of the after action. But we obviously knew that he was Crooks was suspicious. He had not gone into the venue, and they were actively doing everything they could to try and locate him.
So the local officers who were outside of the perimeter in charge of securing the outside perimeter area, one way or another, understood or got direction that they needed to try to find Crooks, presumably to ask him questions, interview him. Is that what the protocol is?
Clear about. I don't want to speak for I haven't seen the Secret Service operations plan, what their responsibilities were and what their understanding of those were from the Secret Service. I don't want to comment on it.
But somehow they got the message
Somehow
that
there
they
was
knew.
information that he was suspicious by the time that municipal officer was hoisted up onto the roof and saw him, he had the weapon out.
Do you know how long it was between the time that the photograph was relayed to the Secret Service and the time when the officer was trying to hoist himself onto the roof?
So that's a critical
Yes.
detail salient question. I would answer it from the reverse time period from if the first shots rang out at 18:11 hours. The hoisting up of the officer occurred probably no more. Again, I'm going to give you a time, but I want to just put it in
We
the
understand
context
it's
of
not
of a
specific.
sequence of events. I would say at most 2.5 to 3 minutes before that first shot. rang out.
And when
What they
he
were notified in the interim still remains under investigation.
right, and when he fell off of he let go.
The municipal officer, when the briefing that I had was the municipal officer saw Crooks saw him, and Crooks turned and leveled the gun at him in a position tactically of extreme disadvantage, suspended, in the air with your legs dangling after somebody had boosted you up.
Right. And he let go, right?
He let go and he fell back down.
And was there at that point any communications that there's a shooter on the roof from the municipal officers who
At
were
that
there?
point, that's all part of the after action. We're just trying to get a sequence of events up to the point when Crooks then fired the weapon. So that's been the focus of our investigation.
But there was at least, you said you thought 2.5 to 3 minutes between the time when the municipal officers tried to hoist on top of the roof, Crooks pointed the gun at them, they dropped, and then between that time and when he fired the shots.
I don't want to give you an exact period of time, but it was minutes. It was a very short period of time, even for his ability.
But not seconds.
I would say minutes, but I would be remiss if I gave you, and I want to be very clear on the record. When you do an investigation like this, the timeline is critical. You're asking me, I was briefed, I'm answering to the best of my ability right now.
And I know my time is up, Colonel Paris. I want to thank you for, providing us with this information. It was incredibly disappointing that the director of the Secret Service did not provide any of this information yesterday. I think
Well
it is
said.
good that we're going to have somebody new at the top, but just having somebody new does not answer the questions. And
Couldn't
so,
agree more.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
I know you are working diligently to try to get witnesses here. This is not an academic exercise. This is not something that the American people can wait 60 days for. With these gaps in information, there are conspiracy theories, there is
100%.
disinformation, and all of our safety is at risk. Political violence is escalated, and we need to know these answers. I thank you for bringing these witnesses here, and I yield
Yeah,
back.
absolutely. And I appreciate the tag team between two sides to get to the details on this, because this is poignant, very poignant. I now recognize Ms. Green for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Colonel Paris, I'd like to carry the dialogue on about the specific timeline. I have a timeline that was given to us on the Oversight Committee yesterday when we questioned former Secret Service Director Kimberly Cheadle, as she has resigned today. But the timeline that I'd like to talk to you about is exactly what you were just discussing here. 18 minutes before President Trump took the stage, it was at 5:45 that the Butler County Emergency Services noticed Thomas Crooks on the roof, took a picture, and reported it. You stated just a few minutes before in your testimony that that police or PSP were given a phone number to the Secret Service, and that Butler County Emergency Services texted or sent the picture. Was that a text? Was that a digital platform? Was it an email? How did they send the picture?
So just to be clear, at that period of time, at 18:45, I don't believe the testimony was
5:45 p.m.
17:45, 5:45 p.m. Yes, ma'am. He was not up on the roof at that point, is my.
No. Emergency Services noticed Thomas Crooks on the roof. This is the timeline that we have. Took a picture and reported it. Who did they send that picture to?
Just to be clear, they were posted in the AGR building and took a picture of him. That's what you're
Yes, who did
That
they
is my
send the
understanding.
picture to?
So I only know from interviews what I can confirm to my knowledge and belief here today that a member of Pennsylvania State Police inside of the command post received that information telephonically and by text, related to the Secret Service, and then was given a number to follow up on. And that was based, again, heightened suspicion.
How did they relay it to Secret Service?
I believe that they verbally turned and said in the command post, this is information that I just received. And then in follow up to that, as directed from the interview that I was briefed on, that was forwarded by text as requested by the Secret Service.
Can you give us copies of that communication and that phone number that was given to them was for Secret Service?
So that's part of the ongoing investigation, and I would defer to the legality of.
Can you find that information and provide it to our committee?
I will look to see if legally I will consult chief counsel within the state police, but it is an ongoing criminal investigation at this point.
So after it was reported, President Trump took the stage at 6:03 p.m. All of this took place. This was 18 minutes before President Trump actually took the stage at 6:03 p.m. President Trump was shot in the face at 6:11 p.m. This has all been reported, these timelines. Why do you not have a timeline?
Because it's not the timeline is going to be critical for the after action report. Obviously, we're conducting an investigation with the FBI. We have been deferential to the FBI in terms of what has been released to the media. I was present for one press briefing on the night of Saturday night, July 13th, and we've been deferential to the FBI on that. So I would refer you to the FBI. The timelines that you're quoting, I just want to be clear on the record. To my knowledge and belief, I don't have a minute-by-minute timeline. I've had multiple briefings about what these interviews have gleaned, but they're from the perspective of PSP investigating the homicide and the 2 attempted homicides.
Thank you, Colonel. During the event, at what point in the day was someone from your team first made aware that there was a potential suspicious person or possible threat?
So based on my knowledge and belief, that information relayed to the command post from Butler ESU, in terms of crooks, was the first time that I'm aware of. Again, keeping in mind, I've heard estimates that there were 13,000 people there. There were multiple people identified as suspicious, several that were identified in that area.
Yes,
And we're-
thank you. Now, you stated before in your questions that you haven't seen an operation plan, but didn't your team participate, and why haven't you seen the plan?
So as my answer prior on the record, I've asked for it. The state police has asked for it. We have yet to receive it. And my understanding is that our walkthrough with our commanders and our area commander was to delineate what our responsibilities were, and we endeavored to fulfill those responsibilities.
Who was the Secret Service agent in charge of the advance team?
I don't know the name of the agent.
How was PSP supposed to communicate with Secret Service on the advance team?
You mean in the planning leading up to it? So my understanding is, as is typical, we're notified. We were notified by email on July 5th. The meeting on July 8th, Monday, was to get all of those partners together to exchange information, how they could communicate with one another, and then the planning took place from there.
Could you provide our committee a copy of all those communications, Colonel Pierce?
So I will check with our legal counsel. I mean, Pennsylvania has multiple state statutes that cover investigative plans or law enforcement sensitive information.
Okay, thank you very much. And Mr. Chairman, one more thing, if I may. Trump's Secret Service protection could be removed under Benny Thompson's proposed legislation. This legislation was introduced while the politically weaponized government was prosecuting former President Donald Trump. This would leave him at risk. I'd also like to state for the record for this committee that over 140 inmates are murdered in prison every single year. This is a dangerous place, prison is, and of course, 8% of violence in prison leads to murder of inmates. This legislation is reckless, and the minority ranking member needs to withdraw this legislation that would lead to the murder of President Trump.
Gentlelady's time has expired. I now recognize, well, we're not going to debate.
Just you think that statement should be made when the ranking members here so he can at least address it? Thank you.
He made his point earlier about his bill. There's a difference of opinion, I suppose, but we're just, y'all are out. Okay. I now recognize Mr. Lalota for 5 minutes question.
Thank you, Chairman. 10 days ago.
Thank you, Mr. Goldman.
10 days ago, a 20-year-old with no military or law enforcement training, with no more than about $1,000 worth of equipment, and apparently working alone, thwarted the United States Secret Service, an agency with a $3 billion budget and about 8,000 personnel. In the early phases of this investigation, the Secret Service, it is clear the Secret Service exhibited poor tactics, including substandard two-way communications with state and local PD. They displayed a lack of strategy, including not employing drones to surveil the risks to President Trump and the crowd. And since July 13th, the Department of Homeland Security and the Secret Service, evidenced by them not being here today, has avoided accountability by, among other things, avoiding hearings like this. The attempted assassination of former President Trump, the leading candidate for president in 2024, shocked the conscience of nearly every American, regardless of party affiliation. We, the members of the Homeland Security Committee from both sides of the aisle, are here today to ask questions and about those who are in charge that day, to hold the Secret Service accountable, but more importantly, to ensure this never happens again. Chairman, thank you for hosting this hearing. Colonel Paris, you're the commissioner of the Pennsylvania State Police Department?
Yes, sir, I am.
And your testimony, sir, is that approximately 25 minutes, and won't hold you to the exacts, but approximately 25 minutes before the first shots were fired, that local law enforcement officers identified Crooks as suspicious?
As suspicious, yes, sir.
And what was it that led those officers to conclude that Crooks was suspicious?
My understanding was that he was milling about and he stood out to them because he never made his way to a point of ingress to the venue. In defense of possible hypotheses, could have been waiting for somebody, could have been delayed, but he stood out to them and they, from their vantage point at the AGR building, identified him as suspicious.
That was 62 minutes prior, as I understand the timeline. That first one, it was 25 minutes prior for the rangefinder.
Thank you, Chairman. And Commissioner, with respect to him being suspicious, were there other folks who were also in the crowd identified as suspicious by law enforcement?
I have been briefed that, yes, there were multiple individuals, which would be consistent with normal operations for a detail like this that are identified as suspicious.
Can we take that as a single-digit number of other folks?
The number that I was briefed on was single digit, but I can't say definitively that I was.
What number were you briefed on, Colonel?
Excuse me?
What number were you briefed on?
I believe I was briefed on an additional 3 individuals.
Okay, so Crooks plus 3. My understanding is you had about 30 Pennsylvania State police officers at the time of the rally?
That were assigned to the detail, both responsibilities of the detail, yes, sir.
And were all of them assigned to your area of the perimeter, not the interior where the Secret Service held the most jurisdiction?
I'm confused by your question, sir.
My understanding, and what the committee has been told, is there were 2 layers of defense of President Trump. 1, the interior, which the Secret Service held the most domain over, and 2, the exterior perimeter, which had ceded a lot of authorities to state and local. Is that your understanding as well, Colonel?
So I don't want to get convoluted with different perimeters. I'm familiar that there was a VIP seating area up front. When I refer to the secure perimeter, I'm talking about the fencing that goes around the Butler County Farm Show. All of our people were detailed at various locations decided by the Secret Service inside of that.
Thanks. That leads me to the next question. If staff can queue up the Eli Crane video at about second number 1 or 2. This is the AGR building. I and several of my colleagues were there yesterday in Butler. Kudos to Mr. Crane for getting this good video. My understanding from your prior testimony is there were 2 officers stationed or assigned, I think was your testimony, to this building?
I'm aware of 2, but I don't want to say, again, not having seen the Secret Service.
And they were assigned, sir?
My understanding is that the Secret Service and Butler ESU had some sort of collaboration and that was to be covered.
What was their assignment in the building, sir?
I cannot comment. I'd be remiss not.
Were they assigned to be in the building?
I can't comment.
What were the qualifications of the people assigned to or around the building? ESU guys, SWAT guys, long guns, good tactics?
They would be, as the name implies, but I defer to their exact training. I'm not aware of it specifically.
But your understanding is through the duration of the incident to at least the first shots fired, they were entirely within the building, not on the building, sir?
I don't 100% want to say where they were the entire period.
But you don't have an understanding as to whether they were assigned to be in the building or on top of it?
I don't. I would need to see the Secret Service operations plan.
And would that have been left to the discretion of state and local, or would that have been left to the discretion of the Secret Service? It sounds like you're saying that would have been left to the discretion of the Secret Service.
I would say it's the Secret Service as the lead agency, just like they told us. Here's the post we want you to staff. This is the motorcade we want. I would defer to the Secret Service.
Thanks, Colonel. When in Butler yesterday, we asked the question, why weren't the two well-qualified ESU officers on top of the building rather than in it? And what would you say if we were told the explanation is, well, it was a hot day in Butler and there was air conditioning inside the building and not on the building? What would be your reaction to that assertion, Colonel?
I can't respond to it. I have no firsthand knowledge about it.
Was it a hot day in Butler that day?
I believe it was a warm day, yes, sir.
But you have no knowledge of whether or not the Secret Service or anybody else assigned these two officers to be in the building and not on it?
No, sir.
I yield, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields, and we're going to go out of order because Mr. Luttrell has to get to his committee, so you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Can you pull the video back up, please? Just for clarification, that is the exact point where the shooter was positioned, correct? Looking through that window in proximity to, if you give a range fan, if you was to expose yourself outside that window, is that the shooter's position? No? In relation to that video, where is the shooter's position at? Just further on the left side. And Mr. Paris, can you clarify something? There were ESU agents internal to the building or in proximity to the building and in that location, correct?
I don't know to that specific location, but they were assigned to the AGR building.
And once the call went out that you had a bad actor in, the agents in the building left their position to try to find that individual?
My understanding is he was on the ground moving around the perimeter, and they moved to actively aid in the search along with additional municipal officers who were.
Does it make sense that ESU agents would be positioned inside the windows so they'd have a better vantage point out into where the X is, or where the asset is located?
Could you ask that question again?
And it makes sense to me that the ESU agents would be positioned in these windows, the windows that they're talking about in this building, so they could have better eyes on the asset, the president, instead of internal to the building milling about. Is that a fair assessment?
I'm remiss because I don't know what the conversation was and what the responsibilities delineated.
I think my concern is if we did have agents, let's just speak hypothetically here, if agents were positioned in these windows in order to provide protection for the asset, and then they were released, and I'm assuming they work in pairs, correct? There's only 2 of them, or is there 4 of them in the building? Do we know the answer?
From my briefings, there were 2.
There were 2. But to me, it would make sense that one would stay behind in order to cover the X or cover the asset. And then one would engage in activity to find the actor that they were trying to identify, correct? I think my concern is the individuals may, and I hate to say this out loud, but if we didn't do due justice and we left that asset exposed because both ESU agents went to look for a bad actor, we just gave the shooter a bowling alley.
I don't know what their responsibilities and their rules of engagement were, not having seen the Secret Service operations plan. And I'm reluctant to speculate at this point, 10 days out, sir. I would rely on the reviews yet to come.
When it comes to Secret Service, talk comms matrix here real quick. When it comes to Secret Service and the local law enforcement, the state law enforcement, I understand that they are housed in the same, is there a common communication channel? And if so, does each agent and each officer that's working the event have, and I'm going to use old terminology, do they have an avalanche call? Do they have a no joy? When they see something that raises the red flag, can any officer radio in, go, no go? We are not, hold the asset in place. We have somebody that we're looking for. And if they do or if they don't, how many people does that have to go through to get to the right actor in order to say stop?
I don't know.
Okay, we need to figure that out. Because if I'm an ESU agent in this window and I have to radio a person who has to radio somebody, who has to radio somebody else to get to the main person, then to call it, the dishes are done.
I'm aware of 3 radio systems in operation, PSPs, the Secret Service, and Butler counties.
All communicating on different channels.
Technically, yes, but the integration occurs I can only speak from PSP. Our integration occurs by us having somebody inside of the Secret Service command post. Again, for an incident of this magnitude, in theory, the more people you have on the same channel, if there was a medical emergency or lost 6-year-old and everybody keys up at once, it paralyzes your communication.
I understand that, but if there's one specific channel that you can go to call an avalanche and say, which is freeze the asset, I think that would be necessary. Now, you mentioned something earlier. You guys done about 20 events this year in Pennsylvania. So, and you spoke, it's common. Now, the military folks in this room are going to understand it's the first month of deployment and the last month of deployment are the most dangerous times to be in combat. One, because you get there the first month, you have no idea what's going on. And then you're there and you get common. You get complacent. And before you leave, that last month, situational awareness kind of dies down a little bit, and that's when bad things happen. There's absolutely nothing common in protecting a president, ever. And as we move forward, I don't want that to be a term that we use, because common just got our president, our former president, shot. And if these assets would have been on high alert, and I'm not saying that they weren't, but when things become common, we get complacent.
I've instructed our commanders moving forward, if there is any, my expectation would be that through the collaboration and the planning of these events, you want more people there, you want people voicing issues and everybody operating on the same page in a unified command. But I have instructed our commanders, the ops plans get reviewed prior to this up through our Deputy Commissioner of Operations, Lieutenant Colonel Bivens, seated here behind me today. But as a result of this, if there are any issues that our people see, we are ordering them to flag them, and we'll work collaboratively moving forward for the remainder of the season and moving forward.
Thanks, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. And our witnesses, at any point where we're going to probably go at least another hour here, if you need to take a break, just let me know and just give me the high sign or a thumbs up. Y'all are okay right now? Or are you? Take a break? All right, we'll do 5 minutes and 5 minutes only. The restroom's right down the hallway to your right. Adjourn.
Thank you. I was just having the same thought.